Atlantis, finally, for real this time, with Tony Petrangelo. We promise.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed, high atop the Edwards Plateau. And what are we doing? What's the agricultural update? Trimming vines.
Yep, doing the final prune, back to getting ready for spring bud break.
Yep.
And it's a lot of work. And then we got to plant 7,000 vines after doing that.
God. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
not looking forward to it.
Nope. But hopefully, will this be the final planting and we'll be done?
Yeah.
No
the
more.
pruning is actually a kind of a peaceful thing. I like doing it.
Yeah. As long as it's not boiling hot,
Yeah.
which it isn't right now. It's nice and breezy and cool. So this episode, we have Tony on for more Atlantis, and this time it was actually about Atlantis. And it was good stuff. So yeah, we've already recorded the whole show with Tony. We're just coming back here to do the intro, doing our time travel thing. And I wanted to say thanks to Henry. Henry Hablack sent us a one-up box, and in it were these books that he's made called Legacy of Fire by Henry Hablack, and they're full of his artwork. And it's, you know, as always, Henry's art is beautiful and inspiring and mysterious, and its signature. You know, you can just tell it doesn't look like anything else. He's got his own style, but there's some cool things here. The beginning is he's got some text in the beginning of the book. I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from this. It's really cool. The first part of the text in here is he quotes, "We are a species with amnesia," when he quotes Graham Hancock. And he says, "The contents of this book were inspired by my fascination with myth and history and how they relate to the origins of our civilizations. Hints of an interconnected worldwide culture are everywhere you look. Pyramids in Egypt, South and Central America, and China. A global system of encoding stories in the constellations of the zodiac. Elongated skulls that show up in burials worldwide from Peru to Anatolia, but are mostly limited to elite royal burials. Memories and myths of a world-devastating flood, fire raining from the sky, and a group of civilizing gods. Who were these gods? Around 10,900 BC, an event known as the Younger Dryas event changed the face of the Earth, and something, most likely a giant meteor, struck the northern hemisphere of our planet and devastated Gaia. Massive flooding, continental fires, and hundreds of feet of sea level rise caused the extinction of megafauna, as well as the disappearance of the Clovis people in the Americas. And after these events, the gods appear and instruct mankind in the art of city building, language, laws, animal domestication, metallurgy and crafts, and eventually war." And it goes on from there. It's really cool. And he gives us a shout out here. He says, "Researchers such as Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, as well as podcasters such as Russ and Kyle Allen of the Brothers of the Serpent podcast have been bringing many of these ideas to light for years."
Wow.
So thank you so much, man. I really appreciate that, Henry. And so he sent us two of the books. In the back of mine, there's a note to me. It says, "Russ, thank you guys for providing hours of informative info on the most fascinating subjects out there. Stoked on all the connections I've made through you guys. I hope you enjoy this. Henry."
Yep. And I got a book as well. And I have to say, dude, it's a beautiful, beautiful composition here. So I really appreciate it. Yeah, I got a note. It says, "Kyle, thanks for your quick wit and exceptional script art abilities. Keep kicking out the jams. MFer. Seriously love everything you guys do. Keep being awesome. Henry." Thank you so much, bro.
Yes, thank you so
awesome
much.
Book.
And much of your art is still hanging in the Tangent Cube.
Oh, yeah.
We display it with pride. It always evokes conversation, and it's beautiful. So it's in every Cosmography episode, you know.
That's right.
So yeah, we really appreciate it, buddy. And I'm going to put this book in my collection. It's going in the library. So thank you so much. And now I say, without further ado, let's get into Atlantis with Tony. What do you say?
Hey Siri, should we get into Atlantis with Tony?
Okay, I found this on the web for Should We Get Into Atlantis? Check it out.
All right, so we'll do that, and we'll see you in a minute. We're back, ladies and gentlemen, brothers of the Serpent podcast. The Atlantis with Tony Petrangelo. We promise for real, for sure, for serious this time. And we wanted a very heartful welcome back to Tony. Thanks a lot for coming on the show. Tony is one of the infamous Discord lurkers.
Now he's an admin.
And an admin.
Like really,
that's dangerous.
Yeah, it was a really
Dangerous
bad idea,
grounds.
but everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
But welcome back, buddy. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. First time I was on, we basically just talked about like some of the background of Atlantis, and the second time I was on, we talked about my idea about an idea about a Bronze Age Atlantis and some sea people stuff, but we never actually talked about the city itself, like Poseidon and the rings. So
Yeah.
I figure we should do that. Maybe just talk about like Atlantis itself and where it could possibly be. So
Absolutely, yeah.
that's the.
It's obviously in the
idea with this,
Azores, right? So we're just going to talk about that.
Yeah, it's going to
in
be
the Azores?
all Azores all the time. That's the whole show.
I think there is a show that talks about that for a number of episodes.
Really?
So we might mention
I
that.
don't know what show that could be.
Yeah, I don't know. You guys might have heard of it. We'll
Yeah,
see.
it's possible.
So yeah, I guess you guys are all familiar with the rings. The circular
Concentric
central
circles.
city of Atlantis, which is, I don't know if it's the thing it's most famous for, but one of the things that it's famous for. So it is typically, you'll see it, I don't know, represented a lot of different ways, but like it's in a lot of the descriptions of Atlantis, Plato's uses some very specific numbers and uses numbers to describe, like the widths of things and the length of the plane and stuff like that. And the description of the center city and then the plane is one of the things where he's using a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
And so the way he lays out the center city is 5 stades in diameter, and a stade. Well, I guess I don't have it on this particular slide. It's on this one. A stade is about 185 meters. Depending, like there's a bunch of different versions of a stade. So
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Yeah.
yeah. So of all of the different versions, the 185 version is basically the one that's right in the middle of everybody's different version. So that's the one I'm using, not because I think that's the right one, but just because I got to pick one if I'm going to start throwing numbers out about distances and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I just picked the one that was essentially the median. And I'm not trying to say like that's 100% what a stade was, what Plato meant by a stade. The median one, the 185 meters, is also known as the Attic stade, which would be like the Athens stade. So I guess if Plato was going to use one, that would probably be the one he was going to use. But at the same time, we don't know where this measurement came, if it was part of the Egyptian story or what. So, anyways, so yeah, the center ring part was 5 stades in diameter. And then there's a ring of water, which was 1 stade. And then the next ring of land and water were both 2 stades in, well, not diameter, in width. The center island was 5 stades in diameter. And then the first ring of water was 1 stade in width. So
Okay.
then if we're going diameter, then obviously the diameter would be 7 stades because we're adding one to each side of the 5.
Yeah.
The next ring of land is 2 stades width. The next ring of water is 2 stades width. Next ring of land is 3 stades width. The next ring of water is 3 stades width. So if we just actually
real
figure
quick,
that out in miles, that's like 3 miles of width to the outer water.
Okay.
I just want to mention 185 meters is 606.8 9,554 feet. So I remember this 600, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm thinking of what was it, like 612 maybe, and then 600. So somewhere between there. You picked the median. Is that what you're saying? Out of the for the stayed?
The state, I think it was somewhere between like 152 meters and like 210 meters, I think were the different numbers I saw.
So
I don't
it's a lot
remember
more.
now what they all were, but I essentially, whatever was the one in the middle was the one I picked. As far as there was like 6 or 7 different ones I found.
Okay.
So yeah, so I guess if that's like 600 feet then. But I guess just trying to get so that we can conceptualize the actual size we're talking about here.
Yeah, 3 miles
A lot
across.
of these, when we're looking at locations, a lot of what we're going to be dealing with is would it fit in here or would it not fit in here, or like what's the size of the place we're talking about?
Yeah.
This type of stuff. So just so that we're kind of like aware of like what Plato's talking about as far as sizes of the city, size of the plane, all that kind of stuff, just so we have context for all these different locations people are talking about, where it could be. We can at least say, would the thing that Plato's talking about actually fit there? And if not, are these numbers even accurate? Whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Most of the things we're going to talk about, they don't fit. So
Okay.
especially most of the Bronze Age ones, because most of the Bronze Age ones are in the Mediterranean. Not a lot of big wide open spaces necessarily on islands in the Mediterranean. So, but yeah. Anyway, so the central island portion is essentially like 3 miles in diameter, which is essentially, about the size of Washington, D.C., give or take. So that's what we're looking at for like the center of the city kind of size of location. He also says then there's a ring of land that extends for 50 stades outside of that last ring of water.
Yeah.
So then there's this overall sort of, and then that's surrounded by a wall. So there's this sort of larger structure that's outside of the last ring of water. So if we go 50 stades out, so then that's 50 stades of width. So that's, if we add up everything, that's like 127 stades overall of diameter, which ends up being about the size of New York City. New York City obviously is long.
Yeah.
So if we were going to, compress it and everything so that it wasn't, and it was, just basically the land mass of New York City is what we're dealing with.
15 miles across. Is that the
something
idea?
like that? Yeah. I mean, New York City and obviously it's thinner than it is longer. It's like New York City's longer than 15 miles, but it's thinner than 15 miles.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's about that same amount of land mass we're dealing with.
Yeah. Same area.
Yeah, same area.
Different shape. Yeah.
And then there's also a plain. So the center city is set beside a plain, and the plain is 3,000 stades by 2,000 stades. So that ends up being about 345 by about 230 miles. And so that's a fairly large chunk of land. That's essentially the size of North Dakota.
Yeah, that's big.
So that's a big plain. So, if someone talks about like Crete, obviously they're not talking about like North Dakota is 5 times bigger than Crete or something. I mean, it's way bigger, right? So this is a large plain that Plato's talking about here. Additionally, he talks about around the plain, there was a canal dug. So around the outside of the entire plain, they dug a canal that was 100 feet deep and it was 1 stade wide. So that would be 10,000 stades in length. So that would be about 10 trillion cubic meters of earth that would have to be removed to build this canal around North Dakota is what we're talking about here. And not only that, every 100 stades, they cut cross canals in. So it's essentially like a giant patchwork of canals throughout this plain. This is a representation of what the plain could possibly look like. This comes from a book called Plato's Mathematical Imagination. He doesn't say, like, there's these diagonal lines that go towards the center.
Yeah.
He doesn't necessarily say that there's one for every single cross line. And I don't necessarily know if this particular diagram is what Plato's getting at. And I have a quote here where he talks about how the plain is, and I'll just read this whole quote. So he says, "I will now describe the plain as it was fashioned by nature and by the labors of many generations of kings through long ages. It was for the most part rectangular and oblong, and where falling out of the straight line followed the circular ditch. The depth and width and length of this ditch were incredible and gave the impression that a work of such extent, in addition to so many others, could never have been artificial. Nevertheless, I must say what I was told. It was excavated to the depth of 100 feet, and its breadth was a stadium everywhere. It was carried round the whole of the plain and was 10,000 stadia in length. It received the streams which came down from the mountains, and winding round the plain and meeting at the city, was there left off into the sea. Further inland, likewise, straight canals of 100 feet in width were cut from it through the plain and again left off into the ditch leading into the sea. These canals were at intervals of 100 stadia, and by them they brought down the wood from the mountains to the city and conveyed the fruits of the earth in ships, cutting transverse passages from one canal to another and to the city."
Wow.
So he says transverse passages, but he doesn't necessarily define how many transverse passages there were or what the spacing of those were.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily know if it was like he's saying it was a grid patchwork like this or not. Either way, they dug a lot of canals.
Yeah.
It would have been a huge project to do all this, even if we're talking about over many generations.
Right.
Like, just for some context, the Panama Canal was 200 million cubic meters. And so, we're talking about just the outer canal of Atlantis would have been 10 trillion cubic meters.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a huge project we're talking about as far as the plain. And this is the primary reason a lot of people are like skeptical of Plato's numbers, because they're like, no way, dude. Like, nobody did that. What are you talking about? So
yeah, that's a good point.
It's kind of, I think it's interesting to put this into context, like what he's talking about as far as like sizes, because he's talking about a huge plain, like just finding a space of land that's a plain that's large is just kind of challenging in and of itself. Like, I guess in America and Asia, places like that, I guess Europe, you can find it. But anytime you get near the coasts, it's going to be tough to find like a plain that's that large.
Right.
But we're going to throw all that out and say he was just completely full of it on all that. And we're going to accept the main idea.
Throw all that out, yeah. They're like, just divide it by 10. We're good. So now we're just going to go through some of the other stuff Plato talks about as far as Atlantis, as far as just like things about the city and the place itself. So he says it's from the Atlantic. This power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean. He says, or the ocean, that's a translation, and we'll get into that a little bit. And I've talked about this previously. That depends on translation. But he says it came from the Atlantic. It says it was an island in front of the Pillars of Hercules. So there was an island situated in front of the straits, which you call the Pillars of Hercules. He says it was larger than Libya and Asia. So larger than Libya and Asia put together. Now, obviously, back then, in Plato's time and before then, Libya and Asia were not, like, I guess what Libya, the country Libya is probably larger than what Plato was envisioning Libya as.
Yeah.
He was probably just thinking of the coastal strip along North Africa, maybe inland a little bit. But, in that time, Libya wasn't like the country of Libya now, where it's this kind of huge landmass.
Okay.
And Asia would have really just been like Turkey and then the strip of land, up to like the Euphrates on the Mediterranean side. So, it would have been a fairly large area to combine Libya and Asia at that time, but it obviously wasn't the huge chunk of area we're talking about if we combined Libya and Asia today.
Yeah. Basically, like it's almost half the land on the planet, basically.
Yeah.
All of China, all of India.
Exactly. Yeah. Asia's
huge.
He's basically talking about like Asia Minor, but even smaller than what we would consider Asia Minor today, because that would take in like all of the Middle East.
Yeah. Okay.
He wasn't even really talking about all that necessarily.
Right.
It would be the way to other lands. So it was the way to other islands, and from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent which surrounded the true ocean. It ruled other areas. Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Hercules as far as Egypt, and Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. It invaded Egypt and elsewhere, and endeavored to subdue at a blow our country and yours and the whole of the region within the straits. It was destroyed, island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. Oh, and the sea was impassable. So the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable. And this is all stuff. These are all things that come from Timaeus.
Yeah.
So he has a little bit about Atlantis and Timaeus, and these were the aspects of Atlantis he talks about in Timaeus. He talks about Atlantis a lot more in Critias. So I'm not going through these ones here necessarily in the order he talks about them. I've kind of divided them up into different categories, I guess you'd say.
Okay.
So these are things about like the natural environment of Atlantis. So a large plain, we talked about that. He says it was looking towards the sea, but in the center of the island. A central hill. So in the center of that center 5-stade diameter, like center island, there was a what he calls a mountain not very high on any side. Lofty. The whole country was said by him to be very lofty and precipitous on the side of the sea. The plain was surrounded by mountains. So the country immediately about and surrounding the city was a level plain itself surrounded by mountains, which descended towards the sea. Sheltered from the north.
Okay, hold on. Can we stop?
Yep, absolutely. Go
those first 4 sounds like a crater. Isn't that interesting? A mountain range surrounding the whole plain and a central uplift in the middle.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
No, that's
It's in Greenland.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he describes the plain as oblong, so I guess it'd be more like a Carolina Bay.
Yeah. Yeah, but
crater.
still, it's not quite circular, but a range of mountains surrounding it that go down into the sea on the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, for sure, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then a central uplift that's the middle part. Yeah, I mean, and then you get these rings of water.
Yep, the rings of the central city definitely, conjure up ideas of like a crater formation where you get the central uplift and the radiating.
Yep.
They spread the widths extend as it radiates out.
Yeah, exactly.
Sheltered from the north. So this part of the island looks towards the south and was sheltered from the north. Hot and cold springs, 2 springs of water from beneath the earth, one of warm water, the other of cold. Fertile soil. So every variety of food to spring up abundantly from the soil. Orichalcum. So we'll talk about this a little bit as we go because some of the location hypotheses are based on this. But it's important to remember that Plato says it was dug out of the earth.
Yeah.
So a lot of people who talk about orichalcum will say it was brass
or an alloy
or some
of some
sort
kind.
of alloy.
Yeah.
But Plato specifically talks about how it was dug out of the earth. So either he was wrong about that or it wasn't an alloy.
Maybe it was something they were digging out of the crater.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
That.
Some metal from space.
Freaking, yeah. It was iridium.
Wooded. There was an abundance of wood for carpenter's work and sufficient maintenance for tame and wild animals. Elephants. This is the sort of big bugaboo for most of the hypotheses are the elephants, or at least most of the non-Ice Age hypotheses.
Yeah.
Ice Age, it's easy to do the elephants thing. You just be like, hey, it was the Ice Age.
Mammoths. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, he specifically says there was a great number of elephants on the island. And then some people will even talk about, well, there were dwarf elephants on Malta and Crete.
Yeah.
But he specifically talks about two it might have been a different quote about how the land was big enough for the most voracious of animals, the elephant or whatever. So he's talking about them as being a really big animal. So I don't think the dwarf elephant thing really flies for this. He says variety of animals. There was provision for all other sorts of animals, both of those which live in lakes and marshes and rivers, and also those which live in mountains and on plains. So he's talking about a wide variety of ecosystems in this place.
Yep.
Variety of plants, whatever fragrant things are now on the earth, whether roots or herbage or woods or essences which distill from fruit and flower. So yeah, again, just talking about how the soil's fertile and there's all the different plants, and then adding on to that 2 growing seasons. Twice in the year they gather the fruits of the earth, in winter having the benefit of the rains of heaven, and in the summer the water which the land supplied by introducing streams from the canals. So it rained in winter. They got water from, I'm guessing, the snowpack melting in the summer.
Yeah.
Is maybe what that sounds like.
Interesting. 2 growing seasons.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So center city architecture. So there was a canal to the center island. So we saw there was like 50 stayed land circle around the whole kind of center island. They dug a canal through that, going all the way to the central island. And they bridged over the passages to the central island, so that they bridged over the zones of sea which surrounded the ancient metropolis, making a road to and from the royal palace. There was a central palace. So at the very beginning, they built the palace in the habitation of the god and their ancestors, which they continued to ornament in successive generations, every king surpassing the one who went before him to the utmost of his power, until they made the building a marvel to behold for size and beauty. So, yeah, I mean, again, just talking about, they built a palace in the middle of the island, and then they just kept adding to it as they went. Surrounded by a stone wall, all this, including the zones and the bridge, which was the 6th part of a stadium in width, they surrounded by a stone wall on every side. Towers and gates, placing towers and gates on the bridges where the sea passed in. So, all the towers and gates they had, or all the bridges that people were able to pass through the city, they had, gates and towers to protect that.
Yeah.
White, black, and red stone. The stone which was used in the work they quarried from underneath the center island and from underneath the zones on the outer as well as the inner side. One kind was white, another black, and a third red. And as they quarried, they cut out docks. So they at the same time hollowed out double docks, having roofs formed out of the native rock. So as they cut out the stone to use for the building, they made docks for the ships. Colorful buildings. Some of the buildings were simple, but others they put together different stones, varying the color to please the eye. And then walls coated in metal. So the entire circuit of the wall, which went round the outermost zone, they covered with a coating of brass. And the circuit of the next wall they coated with tin. And the third, which encompassed the citadel, flashed with the red light of orichalcum. So here's where he does this in a couple spots where he adds a little further description of orichalcum. So here he says flashed with the red light of orichalcum.
Yeah.
So there's a couple clues: was mined, red flash with red light.
And people who think that orichalcum is a type of brass, well, there he says, well, the first one is coated in brass, but then.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
So he's distinguishing right there brass from orichalcum.
Yeah. And I've heard orichalcum sometimes described as people think it might have been an alloy of gold and copper, which would make it like a type of red. It was
also like mountain copper.
Yeah, make a red gold, basically.
Or even like the Michigan copper. I mean, that's part of that whole hypothesis, is that was the orichalcum.
Yep.
But yeah, well, that'll come up. It's like the central point to one of the hypotheses we'll talk about. But that's one of the I don't know. It's one of those things that.
Yeah, no one knows what it is. Like I said,
people get wrong because they a lot of times will refer to it as an alloy, or because I think in classical times they referred to orichalcum as an alloy, but Plato's not referring to it as an alloy.
Yeah, he's saying that they dug it out specifically as a metal, like it is. So yeah.
So the temples, there was a forbidden temple, a holy temple dedicated to Cleto and Poseidon, which remained inaccessible and was surrounded by an enclosure of gold. And then there was a separate temple, Poseidon's own temple, which was a stadium in length and half a stadium in width, and of a proportionate height, having a strange barbaric appearance. So for the Greeks, barbarians were essentially anybody who didn't speak Greek. So a strange barbaric appearance would just basically mean a strange foreign appearance.
Yeah.
Which he's talking about a foreign land. So I don't necessarily know what to read into that barbaric appearance, but all outside the temple, with the exception of the pinnacles, they covered with silver, and with the pinnacles with gold.
Wow.
Inside Poseidon's temple, in the interior of the temple, the roof was of ivory, curiously wrought everywhere with gold and silver and orichalcum, and all the other parts, the walls and pillars and floor, they coated with orichalcum. In the temple, they placed statues of gold. There was the god himself standing in a chariot, the charioteer of 6 winged horses, and of such a size that he touched the roof of the building with his head. Around him were 100 Nereids riding on dolphins, for such was thought to be the number of them by men in those days. There were also in the interior of the temple other images which had been dedicated by private persons. So, giant statue of Poseidon, Other stuff, people would bring in dedications, you know, that they would leave in there. I mean, this is fairly standard for temples. People would dedicate stuff in the temples. The coated like the walls, pillars, and floor they coated with orichalcum. So the entire interior of the temple, essentially, except for the ceiling, was coated in orichalcum.
Yeah, and the ceiling is ivory.
Yeah,
That's
ivory
an
with
amount
gold and silver like
Yeah.
highlights, basically.
Wow.
Outside Poseidon's temple, around the temple and on the outside were placed statues of gold of all the descendants of the 10 kings and their wives. We'll get to the 10 kings, but yeah. So essentially they're saying outside the temple, they put statues of all the 10 kings. Yeah, so it would be 20 statues, I guess, unless some of them had more wives, I guess, but a bunch of gold statues outside the temple. And then there were also many temples built and dedicated to many gods. Just throughout the land, there were many temples. So this is fairly standard in, you know, pagan times. They'd have like a chief god of the city, but then you'd also worship all sorts of other gods too.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. The barbaric appearance is interesting that he only points out that one as being barbaric in appearance, which makes me wonder if, well, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what to read. I feel like it's possible to read too much into that, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, possible.
But yeah.
But it also implies that it doesn't quite look like the rest of the temples and buildings in the city. Like,
yeah, that's
know?
true.
So
he doesn't point out barbaric for anything else.
Right. And so it's like, I wonder again now if we're talking about something where somebody found something very old and then built a city around it. And that thing in the middle that's very old is weird because it's not the same architecture.
That's, yeah.
Yeah.
That could very well be because he does talk about too how that was successively ornamented over the generations.
They kept
and built on. He doesn't really talk about that for anything else either. Like, the Poseidon temple, they built it and then that was it.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. I guess I hadn't considered that, but yeah. I mean, that would make sense.
Yeah.
If there was an older structure.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you know, it's I don't know, because we've been looking at all this Peru stuff with Ben, so I'm like, yeah. It was like giant cyclopean blocks and it was weird.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. It was like, that's the old one.
Yeah.
Well, even like in classical Greece, they would build on top of older foundations sometimes too. So it's
for sure.
I mean, it's common. Yeah. So yeah, some others. This is getting into, I guess, like the politics or the public life of Atlantis. A little politics here now. Atlantis politics.
All right.
Yeah.
So
thin ice,
so
buddy.
The first Atlanteans. So this is before Poseidon. In this mountain there dwelt one of the earthborn primeval men of that country, whose name was Evanor, and he had a wife named Leucippe, and they had an only daughter who was called Cleito. The maiden had already reached womanhood when her father and mother died. So then she hooks up with Poseidon, and they have 5 sets of twin sons. Poseidon begat and brought up 5 pairs of twin male children, and dividing the island of Atlantis into 10 portions. So that's another of the curious things, is the 5 sets of twins.
Yeah. That's strange.
It seems to be symbolic of something. It just seems unlikely. I mean, maybe if it really was a god who was doing it, then maybe he just had, you know.
Yeah.
That was the way he was.
Always twins.
His god's sperm always divided into twins. But yeah, I don't know. It seems symbolic of something, and certainly twins have like symbology and mythology and stuff like that. So I don't know if there's something tying in with that. But then, 10 portions. So there's 10 kingdoms. Each of the 10 kings in his own division and in his own city had absolute control of the citizens, and in most cases of the laws, punishing and slaying whomsoever he would. So Atlantis itself was just one of the kingdoms. And then there were 9 other kingdoms. So, and he mentions at some other point in Critias where he's like, well, it would be too boring to talk about all the other 9 kingdoms. We've talked about Atlantis. We'll move on now or whatever.
It was a very large empire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and it was. That's basically what he's talking about. It was an empire.
Yeah.
So there was the Atlantis kingdom, but there were these 9 other kingdoms as well. It was wealthy. They had such an amount of wealth as was never before possessed by kings and potentates. Potentates. Traders. Many things were brought to them from foreign countries, which to me means they traded.
Yeah. Yep.
Aqueducts. Of the water which ran off, they carried some to the grove of Poseidon, where were growing all manner of trees of wonderful height and beauty, owing to the excellence of the soil, while the remainder was conveyed by aqueducts along the bridges to the outer circles. So, all these trenches and canals and aqueducts, they were clearly like masters of water management.
Yeah.
Also to that, public baths, they made cisterns, some open to the heaven, others roofed over, to be used in winter as warm baths. There were the king's baths and the baths of private persons, which were kept apart. And there were separate baths for women and for horses and cattle. So they even had baths for horses and cattle. And then horse racing in the center of the larger of the two, there was set apart a race course of a stadium in width and in length, allowed to extend all around the island for horses to race in. So this is one of the outer rings. There's essentially a giant horse race course around the whole ring.
And isn't Poseidon supposed to be responsible for horses, right? Isn't that?
Yep. Horses are his animal.
He makes them from the foam of the sea, and there's some kind of competition, like who can make the best tool for humans, and Poseidon conjures up horses from the foam of the sea.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Yeah, so like before he was the sea god, he was like the earth god, or like it's weird because the earth got divided, but Zeus got the sky, Hades got the underworld, Poseidon got the earth.
Yeah.
So that's the sea and the earth. He later on gets known as mainly the sea god, but he's like starts off as also like mainly just like the earth god.
Yeah.
And so horses are his like main animal. And then as he becomes, he's also known for like as obviously.
Yeah,
like the sea god too.
he's like Enki basically. The god
he's also the earth shaker god.
Yeah, the god of the waters and the god of the earth.
The god of earthquakes and stuff.
Yep.
But horses are Poseidon's thing. And, they have a horse racing course. So horses, they're definitely like a horse culture too.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're horse people. You don't build a horse racing course if you're not that interested in horses.
Right. Or gambling.
So then the laws. So Poseidon's law. So their mutual relations were regulated by the commands of Poseidon, which the law had handed down. So Poseidon essentially wrote the laws. Those laws were inscribed by the first kings on a pillar of orichalcum, which was situated in the middle of the island at the temple of Poseidon. Every fifth and sixth year they would gather. So where the kings gathered every fifth and sixth year alternately, thus giving equal honor to the odd and the even number.
Okay, yeah, that's...
So if you're getting into like the Pythagoras stuff,
yeah,
this definitely is like a huge flashing red light.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
He's talking about Pythagoras stuff here.
Yeah. Sixtus the fifth.
Yeah. So again, this is something it's hard to interpret what he's talking about. This seems unlikely that any actual civilization would organize themselves this way.
Yeah.
So I feel like he's more trying to say a thing here.
Yeah.
But that's what he says about when they gather to like go over stuff.
I kind of like the idea. We do elections every 4 years. Let's do it every fifth and sixth. I think that'd be a good, just go back and forth and make it odd and even. I think that'd be a great idea.
Now you're getting into modern politics.
I know. I know.
Get away from
Get out of here.
Let's try it. Let's give it a shot.
So bulls, there were bulls in the temple. There were bulls who had range of the temple of Poseidon. And this is in the thing every fifth and sixth year when they get together, they would hunt these bulls. So the bulls were hunted without weapons. The 10 kings being left alone in the temple after they had offered prayers to the god that they might capture the victim, which was acceptable to him, hunted the bulls without weapons, but with staves and nooses.
Oh, those are weapons. Come on.
Essentially, they would have a bull let loose in the temple, and the 10 kings would gather every fifth and sixth year and do a bull hunt in the temple.
In the temple
With just staves and nooses.
It sounds like it would break a lot of stuff.
Sacrifice them over that pillar of orichalcum with the laws inscribed into it.
Okay.
And they'd cut the throats so that the blood went over the laws. And
Yeah.
This whole thing. They all wore blue robes. All of them put on the most beautiful azure robes.
This sounds like a ritual that later peoples who found all this stuff would do inside there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's also like very like, I mean, this is, I think a lot of cultures had similar types of bull sacrifices just around the Mediterranean.
Yeah, the Egyptian, the bull sacrificing.
Egyptians sacrificed bulls, the Minoan sacrificed bulls, the Anatolian sacrificed bulls, the Greeks sacrificed bulls. Everybody sacrificed bulls. So again, it's, this is the thing too with Homer, with the Iliad. We know from archaeology, a lot of that story comes from the Bronze Age, but also a lot of it, not a lot, but some of it comes from Homer's time period, right?
Yeah.
So that, some of it was like inserted because it made more sense to the people then than it would have what the original story was or something. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
It's just the question of with this bull stuff, is this original or is this just because, people would understand this? I don't know. I mean, it's tough to know with the bull sacrifice stuff.
Yeah, the whole idea of sacrifice to begin with it sounds like a weird custom that whenever you're reading about people who do it, it's like they don't really remember why they were doing it in the first place or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's, you're bringing, you're destroying something and you're not going to use it the way you would normally use it. And who's that for? It's for some god or whatever, but the god doesn't do anything with it. You have to, somebody else has to come in there later and clean it up, and it's not being actively consumed by something else unless you're burning it.
Yeah.
So it's just, I don't know. It's always.
I think a lot of times the food would end up being barbecue, essentially.
Yeah.
That's not a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Well, no. Well,
If you're gonna cook it and eat it, you are not sacrificing it.
Yeah. No,
yeah.
you got to burn it to ash.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, so wouldn't Utnapishtim be the first? Wasn't that the first sacrifice after the flood?
Yeah.
In the biblical narrative, yeah, right.
Well, yeah,
I
and
mean,
also-
that's Sumerian.
Yeah. The idea that he
Well, I mean, Noah, Utnapishtim,
Yeah.
either way.
he makes a
the same,
sacrifice after finding
Yeah.
land. Yeah.
But
So it's almost like, hey,
before
God,
that, there's
leave me alone, man. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Don't
Yeah.
kill me. I'll kill this thing instead. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've talked about that many times about how repeated catastrophes on the planet makes cultures think that the gods desire blood.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, right. That's
Yeah.
a great theory.
Yeah.
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 And this, that the pillar inscribed with the laws reminds me of the Code of Hammurabi, right? This is a very ancient Mediterranean, or that's not Mediterranean, Middle East.
I mean, okay.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it would have been, your Greeks would have been familiar with all that,
Yeah.
with the Syrians and stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess on a the basic idea being that the set of laws and the society itself standing up for those laws, and people have to sacrifice to keep that order. And then they, like we think of people going to fight for a cause or whatever, and they lose their lives. That's a sacrifice
Yep.
for that cause. So it's like a way of remembering the sacrifice of others by sacrificing not yourself, but something that you have. Like, I can understand a custom like that. So
Yeah.
I guess it kind of does, sacrifice it over the thing we wrote the laws on, bleed all over it so that you remember.
Yeah. We bled for these laws.
Yeah. Okay. We'll just go
Yeah,
with
I mean,
that.
Yeah.
I
It's
think
just
the idea is
weird.
too,
it's
almost
just-
like you're like sanctifying it
Yep.
with like the. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess too, because like you could. A lot of times there's like things to let the gods decide. So maybe by hunting the bull without weapons, they're saying the gods will decide whether we deserve this bull by allowing us to catch it without weapons.
Yep.
And then we're sanctifying that action by, I mean, who knows necessarily what all this is, the meaning and original meaning is, and what like people like read into it later times, like maybe
Yeah.
they're still doing the sacrifices 1,000 years later and they're trying to read meaning into why it originally started.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say, what the whole origin of all that was.
Yeah.
It does seem weird though. I agree.
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
It's always, that's always
that's
a
why, like,
strange aspect.
When
of
you put
these.
that in context, like the good news of Paul, like he could be like, hey, have you heard the good news? You don't got to kill animals anymore.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. That's right. And it's the same thing with the Viracocha. He's like, you don't have to kill people or even animals, just sacrifice flowers, right? Just put some flowers down, right? In other words, like burn some sage or whatever, you set a flower on fire, not a person or an animal. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. We got to take a break. We're already at the end of the first segment here.
We will sacrifice the end of this slide.
That's right.
For a break.
We'll be right back.
are back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, here with Tony, and we're going through actual Atlantis stuff this time, third time around. First time he came on, he was like, yeah, we'll talk Atlantis. Never happened. Second show, he's like, all right, this time we're really going to talk Atlantis Bronze Age. Didn't really happen. So here we are, third time's the charm.
Third time's a charm.
It's a giant tease.
So before you get back into the laws here, I wanted to go back because I was thinking about the earthworks, basically them cutting all these canals, and just the one you said was however many trillions of cubic meters of material. You know, after looking at all this stuff with Ben in South America, all of the terracing that they did. I mean, how much material is that? It's got to be. I mean, it's just insane how much material must have had to have been moved.
Yeah, and it's the entire Sacred Valley.
That's what I mean.
Terraced all up the mountains on either side.
So is this really something to kind of scoff at, the possibility that a civilization could have moved all that earth? I don't know.
I'm just saying it's a lot of Earth. I guess my only point is it's a lot of Earth.
It is a lot.
You were scoffing.
You were kind of skirping it.
Admit it, you
Plato
were scoffing.
scoffs at it. In the text, Plato's like, I don't believe this, but I got to pass on what I was told.
That's true, he does. Yeah.
So, I mean,
Hey, well, that's interesting. I didn't realize that he was kind of scoffing at it. So.
Yeah, well, he's right. He did say, like, this is what I was told. In other words, he's saying, like, I know you're going to find this unbelievable, but here's what I was told.
Okay, so
10,000 stades.
All right. So then the other thing I was thinking that at the time, I missed that part. But I was thinking, well, this could be, an area where it is interesting numbers are stuck in there for other purposes, right? That don't have anything to do with actual earthworks. But the reason I didn't bring it up is because I'm like, well, that's sort of, once again, let's explain away some of the stuff that Plato says, but take the other stuff that we want to believe at face value. So, but if that, I don't know.
Yeah. The fifth and sixth is definitely a number key, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that's not what they were doing.
It doesn't. But the thing is, the fifth and sixth also doesn't really affect people's search, right? The size of the plane does.
Yeah. That's right.
So, but yeah, I mean, you're exactly right, Kyle, right? Like, if you start saying, well, the size of the plane's unbelievable, the size of these canals, the size of the plane isn't unbelievable, but the size of the canals around the plane is pretty unbelievable. It must have been smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, at what point, like, what do you just throw out all the numbers?
Right. Yeah.
Then?
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, I guess what's the right answer?
So,
and that's a good question because, yeah, I mean.
And another aspect of it that I question is, like, why are there all these gods that, are Greek or whatever that don't, why are the Atlanteans worshiping these gods?
Oh, well, yeah, we'll get to that here in just a second here.
So that's
on the next slide.
Okay.
All right.
Well then move along then.
Yep. So we'll just finish off real quick with just stuff about Atlantis. And this is just, we were talking about Poseidon's laws and how the kings of Atlantis got together every fifth and sixth year and hunted a bull in the temple and cut its throat over the pillar. And then what they would do is once, and so they would go through like all of the judgments and stuff for that year. And then when they had given their judgment at daybreak, they wrote down their sentences on a golden tablet. So it's a little Joseph Smith style here. They're writing all their rulings on golden tablets. So to throw that in there.
They had plenty of gold.
It's just the latest iPhone.
Yeah, there you go. So there were many special laws affecting the several kings inscribed about the temples, but the most important was the following. They were not to take up arms against one another, and they were all to come to the rescue if any one of their cities attempted to overthrow the royal house. Like their ancestors, they were to deliberate in common about war and other matters, giving the supremacy to the descendants of Atlas. And the king was not to have the power of life and death over any of his kinsmen unless he had the assent of the majority of the 10. So essentially, they're not allowed to go to war with each other unless everybody consents, essentially.
All 10 of them agree, like, yeah, let's fight.
Descendants of Atlas. So now we're into the Titans.
Well, so Atlas was and I might have not, and this might be on the next page, but Atlas was the first son of Poseidon in this
Okay.
telling.
All right.
So Poseidon had 10 sons, 5 sets of twin sons. Atlas was the first one.
Okay, so we're not talking about the Atlas of the previous pantheon. Maybe. Because that was right. Atlas was one of the Titans. He was
he was one of the Titans. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that here. That's at the last thing on this
Okay.
slide here.
All right.
So going over all that stuff that we went over, so all of that stuff about Atlantis, there's a lot of questions. Just going through it, you guys had a lot of questions about what some of the stuff could have meant, what it could mean. So we'll just go through some of the more common ones real quick. And some of these I've talked about on previous episodes, so I might not get too much into the details. But first of all, island. So Plato uses the word Nessos, but Nessos doesn't always mean Nessos. For instance, the Peloponnese is a Nessos. It's the island of Pelops, but it's not an island. It's a peninsula. And there's other examples of this. Pharos Island was at one point an island and then a peninsula, but it was always called an island. So island it seems to have an older meaning, which meant things other than just an island. And then at some point it started to mean just an island.
Okay.
So, whether this is actually an island or some other thing, a delta or near the sea, or a lot of different things can be Nessos. Atlantic Ocean. So Plato actually uses the word sea, uses the word pelagos. He also uses the word pontos. Both of those words typically mean sea in Greek. In the dialogue Phaedo, Plato actually talks about Okeanos, or what the Greeks would typically call the ocean, and he talks about the way that the ancients usually would describe the ocean as this like world encircling river.
Mm.
And so that's the description he gives in Phaedo, and he uses the actual Greek word for Okeanos, where in the Atlantic story he doesn't use that word. So then the question is he actually talking about the Atlantic Ocean, or is he talking about some other sea?
So if their word Okeanos was some weird idea about, say, a body of water that they didn't actually understand the limits of, like the real ocean, but then they're getting an account from an ancient people who are talking about the ocean in fully described terms with giant land masses on the edges, maybe they would say, well, it's a sea.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Because they didn't actually understand what the real ocean was, right?
He could be talking about the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
He absolutely could be. And just calling it the Atlantic Sea. Absolutely possible.
Because from a civilization that completely understood the Atlantic Ocean for what it was, they wouldn't be describing it as some world encircling river.
Yeah, no. Yeah. But that's how the Greeks described the outer ocean.
But they didn't understand the full extent of the outer ocean.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Point,
yeah. So, and this is just the question of what exactly did they understand about their geography?
Right.
Yeah.
Outside of the Mediterranean, essentially. So, and especially then it's like so then it gets into the question of what did the Egyptians understand about their geography? Yeah. If they're the ones passing the story on, what did the Egyptians understand about their geography when they wrote the story down in the first place?
Right.
Yep.
So we're getting to a whole lot of questions about meanings. Did the Egyptians use the word Atlantic Sea or Atlantic Ocean, or you know what I mean? Like, a lot of this is a question of origins of like who used the term originally, and we get into that with the next one, Pillars of Hercules. In the story, he has the Egyptian priests saying what you people, or what you Greeks call the Pillars of Hercules, did the Egyptian priest, was he the source of the Pillars of Hercules, or was that again like Plato's putting those words in the Egyptian priest's mouth?
Yeah.
We don't necessarily know. So like the Egyptians probably wouldn't have had a very firm conception of what the Greeks thought the Pillars of Hercules was. Like they might have known, well, they think it's the edge of the Mediterranean or something, but they probably wouldn't have had there would have been different conceptions possibly.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So yeah, that's again, the Pillars of Hercules is another one where it's the most common interpretation is the Straits of Gibraltar, but there's other ancient writers, other ancient Greek writers refer to other things as the pillars. And then the question is, again, like, what is if this is coming from Egypt, what's their conception?
Yeah. What do they mean by it?
Yeah. So let's go back to the stadia. the Egyptian guy's not going to be using the term stadia or
No, yeah,
stayed,
exactly, yep.
right? So he's going to tell him, oh yeah, it's so many cubits, or it's so many whatever large measurement that they have, and he's going to be like, how big's that? Well, it's as big as a freaking quarter pyramid. It's like, oh yeah, well that thing's 600 feet tall, right? I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like he's probably, I guess it's about a stadia, or a stadia, a stayed. So yeah, I mean,
there's a lot of that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, the one thing I like, so Solon, like he made all his money like as a merchant. Egyptian Greek relations at this time were primarily economic. So I suspect there would have been terms they would have understood for each other as far as like units of measurement and weights and that kind of thing, because those are significant for economic reasons.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't still have gotten confused.
Well, who was the guy that thought the pyramid was 600 feet tall?
Or 800
so that was
feet
Herodotus,
tall.
and that was based on what the Egyptian priests told him.
That's what I'm saying. So he's like, "Oh, it's about a stade.
Yeah.
It's as tall as the pyramid.
As tall as it was wide.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. No. Exactly.
That would make it a
cube. And that was based on what the Egyptian priests told him. So, and this story is based on what Egyptian priests are telling Solon. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of it is.
And we all know Egyptian priests, man.
Yeah,
I don't know about those guys.
So he says that it was in front of the Pillars of Hercules, and again, we're getting to like Greek words. So the Greek word he uses is pro, which typically, and this a lot of any meanings of Greek words. This is all stuff like I've read people saying what this stuff means.
Yeah.
So that word typically it means like in front of, or at least has some implication of close to.
Yeah.
So, like whether the Americas would fit as being in front of the Pillars of Hercules, like they're literally in front of them, but would you use that word like to describe the Americas as being in front of the Pillars of Hercules? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, they're close, relatively speaking, in terms of space.
So then too, he says the sea was impassable. So, the Atlantic, at least in Plato's time, would have probably never been impassable. But at the same time, in Plato's time, that whole area was controlled by the Phoenicians. And they were certainly known to spread like propaganda about, like, don't come here, you'll get your boat sunk or whatever. Like,
get stuck.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with like, was it really impassable? Was this something they thought was impassable as far as the Straits of Gibraltar? Or were we talking about somewhere else entirely? Again, larger in Libya and Asia. Does this mean larger than Libya and Asia, or is he talking about mightier than Libya and Asia?
Yeah,
seems to be a common other interpretation would be that like the Egyptians are basically saying this was a power that was greater in power than Libya and Asia put together.
Didn't you tell us this the last time? It's like a lot of times they talked about the size of a country by the size of their armies.
Yeah. And Plato does this in describing Athens and Atlantis. He describes the size of the armies and stuff like that. Like when it's describing Athens, he never mentions the size of the Acropolis or Attica or anything, but he does mention the size of the Athenian army.
And so going back to the impassable ocean, again, this is coming from the Egyptian priest, and supposedly it's ancient texts that he's talking about, right? This is a very ancient story that the sea was impassable at some point.
There's an implication that it was still impassable in Plato's time.
Well, I thought the implication was like after the destruction, the sea became impassable, and so the Egyptians, like, if it was written down at some point in antiquity by Egyptians, then they say, and it is now impassable, like that. What is now could have been really old, but the Egyptian priests, they don't go out there. Maybe they don't know anything. They don't know anything about it. It's like, it's impassable now.
Yeah.
That's what the texts say.
I don't have the quote on here. I'd have to find it, but Plato in one of the parts specifically mentions that the sea was still impassable. I don't remember how he words it, but the implication is that in Plato's time, that area was still impassable.
Yeah.
And that maybe that's a mistranslation in the Jowett translation, or again, maybe it's a miscommunication between the Egyptian priests and Solon.
Or that the Egyptian priest believed that it was still impassable because the ancient text said it was.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so he's just telling him, yeah, you can't pass, bro.
Yeah.
No pass.
That could be possible too.
And then there's the Sargasso Sea, right? There is an area of the Atlantic that is
But it's not impassable. But
it's not
like,
impassable, but it is for sailing ships. You can become becalmed there and you get stuck.
Yeah.
And lots of ships, you know, people eventually the ships get out, but the people starve to death or run out of water.
Are you talking about the Bermuda Triangle?
No. But it is in that area, yeah.
So you are talking about the Bermuda. So we already talked about the canals a lot, but you know that's a pretty big project. The orichalcum or orichalcum, again, often thought to be an alloy, but Plato said it was a mind. So what was this? Like that's a question. And then the names. So you brought this up, Kyle, and this is actually a really good question. There's been a lot of talk about this in the Discord too, as well. So yeah, he uses a lot of Hellenic names. Plato specifically says, and I'll read you actually this passage because I do have this passage. Yet before proceeding further in the narrative, I ought to warn you that you must not be surprised if you should perhaps hear Hellenic names given to foreigners. I will tell you the reason of this. Solon, who is intending to use the tale for his poem, inquired into the meaning of the names and found that the early Egyptians, in writing them down, had translated them into their own language. And he recovered the meaning of the several names, and when copying them out again, translated them into our language. My great-grandfather Japanese had the original writing, which is still in my possession and was carefully studied by me when I was a child. Therefore, if you hear names such as are used in our country, you must not be surprised, for I've told you how they come to be introduced. So then the question is, was Poseidon even Poseidon? Right?
Yeah. And he also says that the Egyptians first translated them into their language, so implying they got it from a different language than theirs, which is also very interesting.
It was translated a couple times.
Yeah.
So and Solon, he says Solon recovered the meaning.
Yeah.
So he essentially broke down the linguistic meaning of the Egyptian name and then translated the meaning into Greek.
Which is really cool too, because it suggests that these names and the stories associated with them are really ancient, right?
Yeah.
That he, in other words, he had a modern analog for these things in these very ancient texts that the gods that created whatever they were doing.
Yeah, he translates the Egyptian word and he's like, oh yeah, that's Poseidon. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah. In other words, going back to, comparative mythology, they had the same situation then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's entirely possible. The other thing that could be going on here is it could be. I almost suspect that. So I mean, just to go back in a little bit into what I was talking about with the first episode with, Plato being like the head of this academy. So he actually had a dialogue called the Cratylus, where the entire dialogue was essentially about meanings of names. So the whole dialogue is him taking names and figuring out, all right, this name means, it has this meaning because of, this root part. And so it means this. So it almost seems like he could be inviting his students to translate these names.
Okay.
Like what do these main names mean? Because he's saying there's a meaning to the names, right? He's saying Solon recovered the meaning. If Solon recovered the meaning, then there's a meaning. What is the meaning?
Yeah.
That could be just a guess on my part. That could be not what's going on at all. But just the fact that he's implying Solon is saying that there's a meaning to the names.
Yep.
To me means that there's something about these names that means something. I guess was what I would get at.
Yeah. There's a meaning.
And all we have is there, like at his time, what he translated them to. So you have to assume that the meaning is associated with those
words. Yeah.
What they thought those words meant.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Herodotus does this too when he's in Egypt. He tries to associate Egyptian gods with Greek gods. So he says this Egyptian god means this Greek god, and he tries to do equations between them. And then later on, other Greeks are like, no, that's wrong. You're wrong about this one. You're wrong about that one.
This is So, which I mean, that in and of itself it's suggestive, because if it was a traditional like the way we would think about a religion,
It was like, my God is better than your
they
God.
wouldn't have, they wouldn't be like, oh yeah, that's the same God that, yeah, we're just like different names. It seems like that makes it seem like they were looking at it more like it was a principle or it actually had some real meaning, scientific meaning, or, something beyond just a religious belief. In other words.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even beyond that, even beyond the idea that like they associated their gods with the other country's gods, there was like an idea, back in that time and even earlier, that you would respect other cultures' gods, because you wouldn't want to necessarily bring their wrath on you. Not necessarily that you worship them, but you would, like if you were in some other person's country, you would sacrifice to their god while you were there,
I mean, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It seems like a strange thing for, people of a particular religious sect to be having debates amongst themselves as to which of their gods are the equivalent of these other people's gods. If it was really religious, that doesn't seem like a religious activity from the
that
the pious.
requires the pre-assumption that everyone's worshiping the same gods, and we
Yeah.
just need to discover which names mean what.
Yeah. Now, if it was principles,
yeah, I mean,
or something.
these aren't like jealous gods like the Jewish God. These aren't monotheistic gods who care that you worship other gods.
Yeah.
Are you talking about Jehovah or Yahweh?
Jehovah, exactly, Jehovah. I'm talking about Enlil. is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Let's get it straight. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess that's getting into a whole different tangent, I guess, and maybe that's the whole point. But yeah, I mean, I get the feeling that the ancients were a lot cooler about that kind of stuff. Like they weren't so uptight about, I can only worship my God, but because cities would have like, even with this story, Poseidon was their chief god, but they talk about other temples to other gods.
Yep.
And,
Yeah. Many gods.
Well, I think I disagree, but it doesn't matter. I don't really know. It seems to me that they're kind of doing the same thing we're doing. Comparative mythology.
Yeah.
That's what it suggests to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly a thing. Yeah, the comparing of the gods was a thing but with the Egyptian gods that the Greeks like to do.
Yeah, and somehow that's relevant to the whole Atlantis question, because if they're getting this ancient story, and then the Egyptians are translating it, and then the Greeks are looking at it and saying, like, okay, wait, these ideas are the same. That's what that suggests to me, is that there's something much deeper in the meanings of those names than a religious idea.
Yeah.
But anyway, just my thought.
Yeah. So we're moving beyond, I guess, about Atlantis and getting into theories of Atlantis. You guys might be familiar with this one.
Oh, hey, look at that one.
Not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one, just because there's a podcast that you guys might be familiar with called Cosmographia that has, I believe, 9 or 8 episodes that goes over a lot of details with this theory. So a lot more in depth than I would ever be able to get into. So that would be what I would suggest people listen to if they're interested in the Azores theory. I will just say though that the whole Azores idea comes from Ignatius Donnelly initially, who is like, he's along with Plato is sort of like the other, most responsible for interest in Atlantis.
Yeah.
He wrote probably the most influential, other than the Platonic dialogues, probably the most influential book about Atlantis, which would be Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, which he published in 1882, I think. But yeah, so he like, this was like, so this was short. He published shortly after Heinrich Schliemann had found Troy, and shortly after 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea had come out. And so 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea has Captain Nemo going down to Atlantis and finding the ruins of Atlantis. And then, obviously Heinrich Schliemann finds this lost city of Troy. And I think a lot of people think that Donnelly, these two ideas kind of coalesced in his mind to where he wanted to find the lost city of Atlantis. So his idea was the Azores, essentially, right in front of the Strait of Gibraltar out in the Atlantic Ocean. He's also the one who popularized Atlantis as sort of like the mother culture of all sort of world cultures. That comes from Ignatius Donnelly's book. Before that, that hadn't really been a thing. And Plato doesn't talk about Atlantis as being like a mother culture or anything. That all really just comes from Donnelly. And he, Donnelly was writing before plate tectonics was known as a thing. So there was a lot of flora and fauna similarities between South America and Africa that he was trying to explain with this idea of like the mother culture and there being like this, giant landmass in the Atlantic. You don't necessarily need to explain that stuff anymore just because that's explained with continental drift. Some of the other things he was trying to explain with this idea, though, I guess people would say still need an explanation, which would be like the existence of pyramids on all continents, basically.
Yep.
So, there still obviously is, this is the whole, most of Graham Hancock's work is about this whole diffusionary mother culture idea as well.
Yeah.
But this all comes from Ignatius Donnelly's book, which, is available in the public domain right now. So anybody can get it free and check it out. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, it's worth reading just because it's sort of like the original source material for all of it.
And so that map there is showing us where the Atlantean culture spread out to in the other places.
This is from Donnelly's book.
Yeah, so they
all
went
the
up.
White places are what he is terming as Atlantean culture.
Yeah. So they went down up the Mississippi, and yeah, that's pretty cool. That's really interesting.
He calls Egypt a colony of Atlantis.
Yeah.
So that's his whole thing. But again, Randall gets into way more detail about the Azores as a possibility. And I just have the Azores on the map there down there. You can kind of see it. It looks like a little bit of a triangle in the middle of the ocean.
The three plates come together there.
Yep. So he talks about the hinge where water would push down on it and make it sink more than just the water level itself coming up. So
yeah.
He gets into way more detail about all of that. And so Cosmographia.
Yeah.
Check it out.
You can find that in Cosmographia.
It's a podcast. So the first, I guess, like when the Americas were first discovered, right away, not everybody, but a lot of people, it wasn't too long after that when people were like, that's Atlantis. That's what he was talking about. This giant continent in the ocean that we just found.
Yeah.
That must be what Plato was talking about.
Could have been.
So, and so he's talking about, the way people have read some of his things, you could read it that way. So the way to other islands. So Atlantis was the way to other islands. So these would be the Pacific Islands. And from these you would pass to the whole of the opposite continent, which would be Asia, which surrounded the true ocean, would be some people's interpretation of that phrase. If you're talking about a land mass that you want it to be huge, you have to go to the Americas for that. It's less, there were people who will hone in on areas of the Americas where it could have been like Cuba, just because there was people who found, the pyramids deep underwater, or supposedly found pyramids deep underwater in Cuba.
Yep.
So that was based on sonar. That was done in like 2000. That was like 2,200 meters deep or something like that. That was really, really, really,
deep.
really, really deep.
Yeah.
I don't know even if with isostatic rebound, you would be able to get that above water during the last ice age.
No.
You would need serious subsidence as well as isostatic rebound, as well as sea level rise.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. The Americas it's just popular because, hey, there's a giant land mass there. But I don't know that anybody's found circles necessarily. Which is what everybody wants to find. The Bimini Road, too, obviously gets brought up a lot as far as like the Cuba and the Caribbean stuff, and that ties into Edgar Casey's work on Atlantis, who I don't really know that much about him other than the popular culture view stuff that I've seen on the History Channel about him.
Yeah.
So I guess I know like he had predicted that Atlantis. Some people say he predicted Atlantis would be found in 1969, and that's when they found the Bimini Road.
Yeah, signs of it would be found. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
right.
from what I remember, the thing he actually said was that Atlantis would rise again in 1969.
Yeah.
That's what he actually said. And additionally, the people who found the Bimini Road. Supposedly, natives of the island knew about it for a long time.
Right.
But the people who supposedly found it were people who worked for ARE.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's possible they knew about it and they were like, well, let's go find it now. It's 1969. So,
possible, yeah.
I don't know. I'm skeptical of that. Also, the Bimini Road, like they've done geological work on it, and it's all part of the beach rock. It didn't like come from somewhere else and get set up. It's like it's the same stuff that's the beach rock there. There's multiple phases of this stuff because I'm not a geologist, so I don't know how this stuff necessarily, I don't know the intricacies of how it gets formed, but it gets formed as the water recedes. It kind of like leaves these areas where there's channels and the water comes in and goes out and it forms these beach rock areas. And supposedly there's like a couple like strings of these Bimini roads around this area where the same structure has been kind of formed in a couple of places. So I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical of all that. But that's the Americas was talked about a lot when they were first discovered.
Yeah.
And then of course in America before, that's where Graham Hancock points to as the site of Atlantis. He doesn't really necessarily point to a specific place. He just says there's a lot of crazy stuff going on here during the Ice Age, and a gal got wiped out. So
Yeah.
that was probably where it was.
Yeah. And we're up on another break.
All right. So
Yeah.
then we're going to come back to everybody's favorite hypothesis.
All right.
All right, we'll be right back.
Right back.
And we are back. Brothers of the Serpent podcast. And getting back into the Atlantis stuff here. But I think Russ has a rant about the Bimini Road before we do that.
No rant. Just
a rant.
Just to say that I'm still skeptical. Well, I'm skeptical of the skeptics on this one. Not that I think it's part of Atlantis, but I'm not quite convinced either that it is what they call it. Like a series of old shorelines and beach rock. It doesn't really fit with any other formations that look like that. It doesn't quite follow the coastline properly. It doesn't follow old coastlines properly. There's clearly demarked old coastlines there, and the Bimini Road doesn't fit any of those either. I don't think it's a road. I don't know what it is. It may be a natural formation, but I think that they were too quick to label it as something known. Kyle kind of made this point in the break because they don't like all the speculation having to do with Atlantis. And I'm skeptical of the ARE, even though I am now a paid member. Shh, don't tell anybody. But yeah, I'm skeptical of the ARE and their work. But both sides have interesting ideas on what it is. They've taken some samples and they're like, yeah, it's beach rock. That doesn't mean that it's wasn't built. It's just sandstone, basically. It kind of looks megalithic, but that doesnn't mean it's megalithic. But I don't fully buy that it's totally natural either. But Tony made a great point. Also in the break, we were totally debating each other during the break. We were having this huge fight, and I won. But he made a good point, which was that that there aren't any other large megalithic constructions around there, which makes it strange if that's what it is. But and that's true. But there are other weird things there. There's legends of strange animal effigies, large ones in the ground. Also, magic water sources, healing springs, basically that are right there off the coast, like or just inside from the coastline. It is a strange area. But yeah, I'm not fully on board with it's a natural formation, but I'm also not, I don't buy that, oh, this is proof of Atlantis. So I still think it's a mystery. But that's also my bias. I like everything to be mysterious. So that's how it stands.
I mean, in the end, I don't have super firm opinions about the Bimini Road, I guess.
Whatever, dude. You totally scripted it. Just go back and listen to the end of the last segment.
It's totally natural. Anyways. So moving on to everybody's favorite Atlantis theory.
Yes.
The Richat.
The Richat structure.
So wait. You're going to tell me that the Bimini Road is a natural formation, but this is Atlantis? Is that what's happening here?
Well, it's got circles, right? Isn't that what it is? Like Atlantis is circles.
Yeah,
that's what we're looking
right.
for, right?
It is very circular.
There's the circles, man. I'm looking at circles right now. So yeah, if anybody's not familiar with the Richat, it's a giant eye. It's called the Eye of the Sahara sometimes. In the Sahara Desert, it can be seen from space. It's a pretty large structure. There's a map on here I pulled off of Google Maps with an arrow pointing to it that you can see. People will say that it looks like a tsunami came in and then pulled the sand back with it or whatever. So it looks like, evidence of a catastrophe. That's possible. I don't know necessarily what that's all about, but that certainly is part of the Atlantis hypothesis concerning the Richat. Would that be a giant tsunami came in and destroyed the whole area?
Yep.
There was actually an episode of the Nat Geo show Atlas of Cursed Places that was on recently. And they went to a few places. They went to Azores, they went to Morocco, and then they ended in Mauritania. They didn't actually go to Mauritania, but they had a space archaeologist, Sarah Parsec, do a survey of the Richat, and they found, I have it there on the bottom. This is actually a picture I took of the TV show, and then and then sent the picture. So it's like a picture from my TV. So that's why it might look a little fuzzy, but that's essentially the structure she found there. And it doesn't look like anything you would think would be part of Atlantis necessarily. It doesn't look super. I mean, it looks like, a defensive fortification or maybe for like a pen for animals or something, but whatever. There's structures there.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking for. I call that the Temple of Poseidon. I call that.
Where is that?
That's in I don't know where exactly it is. I think it is in the inner ring.
Okay.
I don't actually recall now which ring it's in, but I'm pretty sure it was in their inner ring.
That's similar to
people have definitely, lived or been in that thing. I mean, there's artifacts and, there's stone artifacts and other things been discovered there. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's not a surprise.
No, there's lots of evidence that people were using the place. Like the archaeology work I'm familiar with says that they were using it seasonally, and it was mostly like lithics that were found, so like stone tools and stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
A structure like this would be evidence possibly of more than that.
Yeah.
More than a Neolithic culture. But
now, are there any pictures of it from the ground? I mean, can you stand on one of the high precipices somewhere and look out and notice this ringed structure, or is it just too big for that?
It's pretty big. I mean, I've seen some pictures on the ground where it's hard to tell. The problem with going to Mauritania is, like, if you go to the U.S. State Department site, it basically says don't go there. You'll get kidnapped by terrorists.
Wow.
So it's like that's the reason they didn't go there on this TV show, is because they were like, yeah, it's too dangerous. We're not going to go. They actually interviewed.
Maybe they're just trying to keep us away from there because it is Atlantis.
It's actually Atlantis, yeah.
I mean, maybe. there's a lot of dangerous places in the world too that people don't want you to go to.
Atlantis is a big place.
Yeah, no, I don't know. There was a guy they interviewed on that show, that Atlas of Cursed Places, and I think Jimmy Bright Insight actually talked to this guy as well. And he went there, and yeah, he was like, yeah, no, I was dumb for going there. I shouldn't have gone. I don't recommend anybody else go. But yeah, he basically said, like, yeah, it's it's tough to tell, what you're on or what's going on, but I don't know. He seemed curious about what it was.
Yeah. That figure there looks like, I mean, there's thousands of those in parts of Africa that are old. Some of them are circles and they're triangular shapes with little circles at the ends of the triangular points, and no one knows what they are, but there's these strange geometric forms all through the desert, and there's thousands of them. I've seen plenty of pictures.
Usually they're called like what, desert kites?
Yeah, kites.
Yeah.
They're all kinds. Yes. Yeah.
Typically, from what I hear, people tend to think they're used for like catching animals.
I know yes, and that hasn't
I don't know.
quite made sense to me, but possibly. But there's thousands of them, so yeah, I don't know what they were for, but they're all over the place, and that looks very similar.
The circular things sticking out to me look like guard towers.
Yeah. Are we going star forts? We going full star fort here?
Square fort.
Also, I think the Watcher is upset. The Watcher's upset about this idea of a space archaeologist. I think he thinks he's the only space archaeologist guy in existence. He broadcasts from space and he does archaeology. So I think.
Yeah, I don't think Sarah Parsec has actually been to space. I think she just gets satellite pictures and looks at them.
Yeah. There you go, Watcher.
I don't know if she calls herself a space archaeologist. I just think that it sounds super cool to call someone a space archaeologist. So that's what I call her. So I've heard other people call her that. I didn't make it up or whatever. It's just I don't know. She's actually doing that though. She's found a bunch of like places in Egypt, temples in Egypt that nobody knew were there.
Yeah.
Essentially by like being able to look at like temperature differentials between the ground and like, cause the stone will have a different temperature than the actual ground.
Yeah.
So just stuff like that. Yeah. She's been able to find a lot of stuff, just using these like methods with satellites and stuff like that. But yeah, the actual Richat, it's just south of the Atlas Mountains.
Yep.
So, Atlantis is surrounded by mountains, and these mountains are called the Atlas Mountains. So that makes people think, Atlas, the first king of Atlantis. We'll get into this a little bit too, because there's also a theory in Morocco, and I'll talk about this a little bit as it concerns that. But there's also later Greeks placed the Amazons over in West Africa and getting into a combat with people that the writer calls the Atlanteans. So there's a few different kind of strands that you can point to from that type of stuff with like the Atlas Mountains and then other various aspects of Greek mythology. Some of that, and we'll talk about this a little bit too, is because the Amazons traditionally are not from West Africa. They're from like the northern steppes. And so as the Greeks like explored to the west, there was this tendency for their mythology to also go west. So some of it, I don't know, with a lot of the stuff with like the Atlas Mountains being, in Africa, the question would be, were those the Atlas Mountains, in the Bronze Age or in the Ice Age when this all supposedly was going on, or was this a much later naming by Greeks as they were exploring to the west? But the Richat, the thing that it has going for it is the rings. One thing to mention about this though is it's a huge structure, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about the rings of Atlantis being like 3 miles in diameter. This whole structure is like 30 kilometers. I guess I don't remember how many miles it is, but it's pretty big. And you can see it from space. Like you can see the little eye there as you zoom out. Yeah. So if you would imagine, like, if you remember back to like how small Atlantis looked next to the plane. Yeah. How big you would have to scale that plane up if we were going to keep everything kind of in its proper perspective or proper proportions, like versus each other. Yeah. You would have an enormous plane. Now the Sahara, in theory, is an enormous plane. So
yeah, and then you would have to scale up. Then you would have to scale up the earthworks, the canals and all that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about something just absolutely enormous at that point.
And that place is not very promising as a fertile area.
Yeah.
So there's talk that the Sahara was greener.
Yeah.
5,000-6,000 years ago, but there was still large parts of it that were desert for sure.
Yeah.
So
and the other thing is where's all of the destruction of giant temples and why there should be blocks strewn all over the place up and down, from some tidal wave. I mean, if it left the ring structure, where are all the building blocks? It should be strewn everywhere.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I found Neolithic stuff, so
Right.
around that same time frame, if we're talking Ice Age. So if that material was still there, then you would think building material from a giant civilization would be there as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, I mean, it's a popular theory these days, though. So.
Yes. It's a beautiful and fascinating formation.
I would love to go explore that
Yeah.
area. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, yeah, it's.
Did you
it's
read?
really crazy?
Yeah.
Did you read anything about the geological formation of the structure?
I mean, just that people think it's like a volcanic uplift.
Yeah.
Where it like went through a series of uplifts where like there was an uplift and then it kind of went back and then uplift. I think that's what I was reading. That's how you get the rings.
Yeah, it's all supposedly it's uplifted and eroded away.
Okay.
So that the rings are actually different layers of the bedrock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. It's a truncated dome or something like that. It's a.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But there.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't read a lot about the geology.
Randall also does a whole show on it on Cosmographia, all the geology surrounding it and what it looks like when it's what they think it looks like underground and how it formed and everything. It's very interesting stuff.
But again, a very unique structure, right? It's
Yeah.
What'd you say?
I might have missed that episode.
Okay.
Unless that was.
How dare you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I don't remember that, but. Anyways,
But still,
so yeah,
that's
the next
cool.
one would be Antarctica. This was Graham Hancock's first Atlantis theory that he popularized in Fingerprints of the Gods. Essentially, is Charles Hapgood's theory that goes back to his book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings.
Yep.
Great book.
Based on his Earth crust displacement theory, where essentially the crust of the Earth is like a peel of an orange that had come loose and slid a little bit.
Yep.
So what I have here on there's a screen, there's on screen, but the Prairie-Rizi map is one of the more common ones. It's like the one that Graham Hancock starts Fingerprints of the Gods off with, talking about that map.
Yeah.
And about how the southern portion shows how Antarctica would look without the ice, and that proves that there was this ancient civilization that had mapped the world. Blah blah blah. There's certainly a lot of other maps. The Prairie-Rizi map isn't the only map that shows Antarctica before people had discovered Antarctica.
Yeah.
So there's the Anantius Phineas map, and there's a few others too that show Antarctica. This is the more like famous one though, the Rizi map. And the Prairie-Rizi map is just famous in general outside of any of that. Like it's on coinage in Turkey. Like it's just super famous in Turkey because the admiral who drew it was a Turkish admiral.
Yeah.
So it's just a famous map in general. It also is one of the earliest maps to show America. So there's just a lot of reasons why this map is like a well-known map.
Yeah. And it's only
but
one
so
quarter of it too. We're missing 3/4 of it. This is just one piece.
Yeah.
Most of it's
Yeah.
not
This
there.
is just what I've found of it on the internet.
No, what I'm saying is that that's all that's left.
Yeah.
It used to that's 1/4 of what used to be the entire map, but when they found it in the archives, that was all that was there, was that piece.
Yeah, so if you're looking at it on the screen, you'll see what clearly is like the Brazilian part of South America here. It looks kind of familiar.
Yeah.
And then it goes down, and then it does this weird thing where it does this, and then this is the part where people think is Antarctica. The one thing I would just make about the idea that Antarctica, like you telling what it looks like under the ice, is that we don't really know what it looks like under the ice, because if the ice was gone, it would look completely different because of isostatic rebound.
Yeah, it would
Like,
rise
we
up
just
out of the
don't
water.
know what the land would look like after the ice came off of it.
Yeah.
So to somehow look under the ice with like radar and say, well, this is what the land looks like under the ice, so they would have mapped it that way. I mean, that is just a little bit, doesn't necessarily work that way.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is like this, South America doesn't do this, where it like curves out like this.
Right.
And so here's my one little animation. So you'll see that the upper part looks like the Brazilian portion of South America, And then this lower part looks like it's South America just got turned 90 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's kind of what that got mapped on the lower part.
Yeah. I've seen that too, that explanation that he just ran out of paper. So he curved the coastline around. But
it could have been that. I know he was working with multiple source maps. So, you know, like,
and he's
whether
also
he misoriented the source maps from where they were supposed to be oriented or something.
Well, he's using many projections on
Yeah.
that. And that's what makes it complex. That's what, when you go through Charles Hapgood's book, he goes through all this cartographic science of decoding the projections. You know, so it isn't as simple as saying, well, he was running out of lambskin there, so he curved it. But yeah, it does.
Because it's a compilation of multiple different map sources, and those sources were projected in different ways. He combined multiple projections to make basically a world map out of all these different projections.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, yeah, they did a lot of work in the book to, well, he talks about the work that they did to
extract
all that stuff.
data.
It's pretty compelling.
Yeah. Yep. And the most compelling part of that is that he gets the agreement of other cartographic experts that it does show the coast of Antarctica. That's what is compelling. It's not just Charles, but he gets the agreement of like the Office of the Navy of, you know, cartography. They're like, yep, that's the best explanation is what they said. So it's very interesting. I don't know. And you're right about the isostatic problem, but if it's just the coastlines that are free of ice, but not the entire continent, then you wouldn't have much rebound.
I mean, you'd have some, but either way, it still shows a connection, which there, even at the height of the last ice age, there was never a connection between South America and Antarctica.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know. I'm skeptical that that's Antarctica, but that's just me, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, the Orontius Phineas map is much more interesting in terms of that.
Yeah, I mean, that clearly shows Antarctica.
Yeah.
There's no question that that's what he's trying to show there.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, there's other explanations for this one. But
The other thing about it is that the I guess one of the other compelling arguments was the east-west lines, typically in maps that were made in the era of Piri Reis, were way off, right? The north-south was pretty right on, but the east-west,
latitude was good, longitude was not good.
yeah.
And so in these, when they're looking at these coastlines, they line up like really, really well, as though they had very
They had good longitude.
Yeah, they had
Which
good
they
longitude. Meaning that they had good timepieces.
Yeah.
Which did not exist.
Which they
at the
didn't
time.
have.
So
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting things about it.
Yeah,
Beyond that.
it's like he was getting data from older source maps, even if it's not Antarctica, and he's just showing the coastline of South America there. It matches that it
the
implies
idea that there were older maps. Yeah, no, and I guess this is more a point about Antarctica than the whole idea that there were older maps in general.
Well, yeah, I agree with the isostatic rebound, but how long does that take versus how long would it take to melt the ice to the coastline? You know, if there was some kind of energy source that could melt enough ice to reveal part of the coastline, are you expecting the isostatic rebound to be so instantaneous that it couldn't be mapped? I mean, what if the people who mapped it went there specifically because the ice melted in some event?
could be.
Wouldn't we do that? Yeah.
Oh
we
yeah,
would.
we would. We'd go immediately.
So then when did it refreeze after they mapped it?
I don't know.
I mean, so then that would have been before the last glacial maximum that it got mapped?
Yeah, I don't know. That's one interesting point that Graham goes through a lot in the book, and so does Charles. Is like, how old is this data?
Yeah.
How far back do you have to go? And then, but then there's interesting sedimentary information off the coast of Antarctica, off the coastlines of Antarctica, that show that, you know, it's intermediate from coarse to fine, showing that there were times when it was river sediments as
Yes,
opposed to
that's right.
ice, like glacial sediments. You know, lots of interesting stuff that it goes back and forth, and they're not the time periods between them aren't that long. Not hundreds of thousands of years like was previously. Well, for a long time, it was what's thought, you know, that the ice on Antarctica has been there for millions of years. Doesn't seem to be that way according to the sediments off the coast.
Yeah, and that's off the coast on that little finger projection part you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's in multiple areas, but yeah, mostly in those in areas where were rivers is where you can tell.
Yeah.
And so if you get evidence that river silts were coming into the ocean sediments, then that river was running and putting sediment out there, whereas now they're mostly blocked. So I don't know. It's all good questions. How long has the ice been there? How long does the isostatic response take? And some, there are many maps, and some of them look like the entire interior of Antarctica is mapped out, as opposed to just the coastline. So,
yeah, well, so that's, I mean, I think they're saying even during the last height of the last ice age, that Antarctica they don't think was ever fully ice free. So
yeah, that's right.
That would have to go back a long ways.
A long way, yeah. Or you have to have, like Hapgood thought, crustal shift.
Yeah, yeah.
His explanation for Antarctica being completely ice free was crustal shift, that it didn't used to be on the South Pole.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that's the Antarctica idea is the crustal shift idea.
Yeah.
I mean that's still Rand Flemath is still I guess the main proponent of that the Antarctica theory. Graham has himself moved on to different stuff.
Yeah, he has.
Yeah, I mean the other thing with the crustal displacement, I know with the that's fine. We don't need to keep going back.
Well, honestly, I don't want it to be Antarctica, because if it is,
we're never gonna find anything, because
even if all the ice melted away, it would.
It's
already just
ice ground it all to dust at this point.
Yeah.
So. The next one is more really, I mean, Doggerland obviously is a place. It's a thing. It's being explored, like maybe not literally right now, but these days it's being explored. But really, this is just to represent sort of like there were a lot of places during the Ice Age that are now underwater.
Yeah.
This being one of them.
That's
but basically any coastal shelf, people have at some point or another pointed to and said Atlantis could have been there.
There is a crater right there, like in the Dogger Bank area. I think I was just looking at this the other day. There's actually an ancient crater that they think was free of. Oh, is that where it is?
I don't know. Is it?
I think it's like right out there in the middle, like where the Dogger Bank maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, I'd have to look it up. I'll look it up during the break, but. Yeah, I was just reading about it, and they think it was totally exposed, like
during the Ice Age.
During the Ice Age.
Wow.
Yeah. There's your ringed structure.
Yep. Done. Mystery solved.
Mystery solved. Russ figured it out. It's surrounded by mountains, giant plain, peak in the middle. All right.
Boom. That's what we do here. Solve mysteries.
That's right.
So yeah, for those of you listening, we're looking at
that's a great map, Tony. That's
we're looking
really
at
cool.
the UK and the North Sea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't make the map.
I know you didn't. I'm just saying, it's a great find. That's a good one.
Yeah, no, this is a pretty cool map. So yeah, it's showing the different ages and when things went went underwater. So yeah, I mean, like England was connected to Europe until like 7000 BC. This would have been like an island at one point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Watcher called it's Silver Pit Crater.
Okay.
Is the one that's out there. Oh yeah, and there's Outer Silver Pit Lake. That's probably on your map there. That's probably what the lake would have been.
There you go, Silver Pit.
Yeah, so I mean, there's also one in like the South China Sea. There's a giant area of coastal shelf that's underwater now that would have been exposed during the Ice Age.
Yeah.
Over by Korea, there's a pretty large area, the Persian Gulf. I mean, there's just spots all over the place that would have been, a lot of these are a long ways away from the Pillars of Hercules. So
yeah,
that Doggerland is enticing because it's so close. But yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot of places that are now underwater that people have pointed to as possible places for Atlantis, just because of the the coastal shelf, all being inundated. So now we're going to go into some of the Bronze Age theories.
Real quick before we move on, the Silver Pit crater is a 20-kilometer crater-like form named after the Silver Pit, which is a nearby seafloor valley, recognized by generations of fishermen. And it was discovered during a routine analysis of seismic data collected during an exploration for gas in the southern North Sea sedimentary basin. So it's in the North Sea off the coast of the island of Great Britain. But I remember what happened when I was looking for. I was reading on the legends of the Shamir, and I was looking for other ancient, strange tools and things that may have been given that can cut stone. And one of those that came up, obviously, was Excalibur, the sword that was given to Arthur. And we've talked about that being something that could have been, right,
Out of
the
crater.
The Lady of the Lake,
Yeah.
right, gives up the metal from the crater.
meteorite.
Yeah, so there's this crater, and they believe that it was exposed at that time. I was like, oh my God. Excalibur came from Atlantis, bro.
That's right.
Okay, anyway, moving on.
So yeah, probably the most popular Bronze Age theory would be the Minoan hypothesis, which is basically that Atlantis was in either Santorini or Crete. There's various versions of this, but the Minoans were a Bronze Age culture that was essentially not entirely forgotten about. There are traces of them in Greek myth, but they were mostly forgotten about until they were discovered in 1900 on the island of Crete. And so there's a structure here that's on the screen. This is a reconstruction of the Palace of Knossos, and this would be the main palace of the Minoan empire or kingdom. What you'll see, there's a structure on the right of it. It's like a U. What's what they call the horns of consecration.
Yeah, their horns. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what the archaeologists call them, horns of
Right.
consecration. But this design, this sort of like U kind of horn-shaped design, is found all over, everywhere in Crete and in Santorini. Like basically every Minoan settlement that's been found, you find these horns of consecration.
Yeah.
So I mean, bulls also were found, like, I mean, not bulls themselves, but like evidence of a bull cult, essentially, in that, like, you've probably seen the frescoes of the bull leapers. So there's frescoes in Knossos as well as Thera of people doing this thing that they've termed bull leaping, where you'll see the most famous picture of it is there's these two women on either side of the bull, and then there's a guy like in mid-flight jumping over the bull. Or that's what they think he's doing.
Right.
This is the interpretation of it, that it's a bull leaping thing. Some people have looked at it and said, like, what is happening here is literally physically impossible. Like, nobody's gonna be able to hold on to a bull while somebody else leaps over it. But yeah, so regardless, there was some bull stuff going on with the Minoans. Obviously, at some point Santorini just blew up. So there's an illustration on the bottom of the screen that shows what the island of Santorini, it's a reconstruction. I mean, nobody really knows what it looked like before the volcano blew up, but it was thought to be just a one big island with volcano in the middle. And then now it's essentially like a sea with like a couple other islands around it. Like the whole middle of the island is just gone.
Yeah.
And so the volcano just completely blew up. And when the Minoan civilization was, this wasn't really, they didn't know this when the Minoans were first discovered, but when they first started finding evidence of the volcanic eruption and started finding like tephra and like stuff under tephra, then it wasn't too long after that people started thinking that, well, then maybe the Minoans were the Atlanteans. Here we have a civilization. They were a seafaring people, and they were, obliterated by a natural catastrophe. This must be what Plato was talking about. It's close to, Greeks, so they would have been aware of it, and this fits everything. There's a few problems, I guess, with that chronology, at least these days, in that based on, the pottery evidence and what's been found in Thera being the other name for Santorini, there's a city, it's known as Akrotiri. So that's a Bronze Age settlement that they've been excavating on Santorini. And based on the pottery they found there, and then the pottery they found in Knossos, they think that the Minoans kept going on as a civilization for another 100 or 200 years after the explosion of Santorini. And then their civilization was actually finally done in by the Mycenaeans invading and taking over. And that's essentially what the archaeological evidence seems to indicate. So there's a bit of a problem with the chronology, if the archaeologists are correct, in that the big catastrophe happened before the end of the civilization.
Yeah.
So when the volcano, when the idea of the volcanic eruption was first kind of found out, they thought that coincided with the end of the Minoan civilization, but that's not really the thought anymore.
Well, yeah, because they were seafaring, right? So there would certainly have been some of them who weren't there when it happened.
No, absolutely. Well, yeah, and
anyone who was on that island when it blew up like that, though, did not survive. Pretty much. I mean, I can't see how you could survive that.
Yeah, and they haven't found really any valuables or bodies on Akrotiri on Thera. So they think either everybody got out in time or they're at the harbor, and they just haven't excavated that part of the island yet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
The thing is, so they think it was the same type of eruption as what was the one in Indonesia? Krakatoa.
Yeah.
With Krakatoa, there was like an initial eruption before the really big eruption.
Right. Yeah. There was
So I think what they think happened was there was an initial eruption which gave everybody time to get out. And then there was the big eruption that destroyed the town.
Yeah.
But this big eruption, either way, would have sent a tsunami towards Crete. Like Crete is just south of Thera.
Yeah.
Like there's literally nothing between Thera and Crete. It's just open ocean or open Mediterranean. And it's pretty deep. So the tsunami would have hit Crete pretty freaking bad. Yep. Assuming there was a tsunami there would have been a tsunami that got generated, but based on the way the land, I don't know. There's a lot of modeling that's been done about trying to figure out exactly how the tsunami went out from Santorini and what would have been affected and stuff like that. So no doubt Crete got hit pretty hard by this. The question would be would it destroy the whole civilization?
Right.
And the archaeology seems to say that no, it didn't, because there's Minoan pottery that keeps getting made after the pottery that was found in Santorini.
Yeah.
So, that's the biggest problem at this point with, there's a lot of problems with the Santorini theory when we get into like sizes of land and stuff. Like, first of all, it's not like the plane doesn't fit in here, if we're getting into problems.
Yeah.
What a lot of people will do is they'll say Thera was the island and then Crete was the plane, essentially.
Right.
So then you're dividing it up into these two separate entities. The things that fit, the Minoans definitely were a seafaring civilization that traded all over the Mediterranean. They traded with Egypt. The Egyptians knew them. They were familiar to the Egyptians. The Egyptians would have been aware if they suddenly disappeared. Yeah. But again, that's not seemingly what happened. The Mycenaeans took over. And from the Egyptian point of view, they essentially just recarved some Cretan people to be Mycenaean people. Yeah. So it's possible from the Egyptian point of view, it was like the same people, just slightly different, or like a different people took over, but it's the same people essentially. Yeah. I don't know. This is certainly the most popular Bronze Age Atlantis theory, but there's problems with it. Yeah, there's problems with all of the theories.
Well, and I think that this story is fascinating. The Minoan, this whole situation is fascinating, and it's interesting to, it shows like one giant natural disaster can destroy utterly a civilization, right? That's pretty advanced. Seafaring, builds palaces, and, moves big stones around, and has a wealthy civilization, and then just boom, Earth just wipes it out pretty much completely. And yeah, there's some stragglers. They keep making pottery for 100 years, but the civilization is over, right? So it's a really interesting story, but yeah, I don't think it's Atlantis, but it is similar, which is also interesting.
The thing that's enticing about it is you don't have to like make up a culture necessarily. Like here's a culture and here's a destroyed island.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, like a
Seems
lot
like
of
they
stuff,
would
it's
have.
like,
Seems like the legend would have said the island exploded, as opposed to it sank into the sea.
ocean. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, again, it's what would the
Especially if-
Egyptians have thought about it? Like, would the Egyptians have known the island exploded?
Well, I mean, if a bunch of people were, if they were trading with them and they lived next to a giant volcano, and then the giant volcano started bubbling over, and then a bunch of people escaped, a lot of them probably would have gone to Egypt and been like, yeah, the island exploded in a giant column of fire and dust, and and the Egyptians would have been like, okay, it sank. I don't know. I'm not buying it.
I'm not buying that.
We'll cross that one off the list.
Island caught on fire. Got it, guys. Okay, next.
I guess, I don't know if you want to call it the flavor of the month. One of the more popular Bronze Age theories right now is Tartessos, or Spain. So if you see this area here in Spain, that's essentially what they're talking about as far as the plain.
Okay.
And it's right outside the Pillars of Hercules. There's specifically, Plato mentions Gadierus, so, and to his twin brother who was born after him and obtained as his lot the extremity of the island towards the Pillars of Hercules, facing the country which is now called the region of Gades, in which part of the world he gave the name, which in the Hellenic language is Emulus, in the language of the country which is named after him, Gadierus. So most like ancient Greek sources equate Gades or Gadierus with Cadiz, Spain. So this would be seemingly one spot where Plato's being very specific with his geography and actually naming like an actual city, possibly.
So this would be an Atlantis outlier, one of the other 10 kingdoms. Is that the idea? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So this would be to his, so not to Atlas, but to the Emulus person is where this area was given to.
Yeah.
Obtained his lot as the extremity of the island towards the Pillars of Hercules. I mean, the people who are proposing Tartessos as Atlantis, are thinking this entire area was the 10 kingdoms, was the Atlantean Empire, essentially.
All right.
So the best thing that's going, there's a couple things this has got going for it. One is that it, you can read Plato as basically giving directions to this spot. I mean, the other thing that has going for it is it was the home of a semi-mythical place called Tartessos, which was known for being rich in metals, rich in gold and silver specifically. There's silver and gold mines in Andalusia in Spain, where, that's where Tartessos got their wealth from. The Cadiz itself is a Phoenician colony. So, this is where we get into too, like Phoenician propaganda and how much of it is, from that. Like the relationship with Tartessos was a Phoenician relationship primarily. I mean, the Greeks started that relationship, the trading relationship, but then the Phoenicians took it over when they got out to this part of the world. And so, it's hard to know like what the Greeks were hearing about that after the Phoenicians took it over, whether they're hearing tall tales or, they're hearing about, I don't think it would have been the Phoenicians' interest to talk to the Greeks about the great wealth in Tartessos. They would have been like, no, that place is a slum. Why would you want to go there? Stay away. But yeah, I don't know. There's a documentary on Disney Plus or Nat Geo called Atlantis Rising with James Cameron that goes through a bunch of different places. They talk about the Minoan hypothesis. They talk about Malta and Sardinia, but as their solution, they land on Tartessos or southern Spain.
Still above the water.
Yeah.
Still above the water. So it depends, I guess, on what you're talking about, because what they're talking about specifically is the Doñana Marsh.
Yeah.
So it's this whole like marshy preserve, like national park, but it's essentially a giant wetlands.
Yeah.
So, I guess you could call that shoals of mud. if you wanted to.
Well, then the
idea
legend
would be at one point it was like a river delta, and then that got destroyed, and it's all just shoals of mud now.
So then the legend should have said, "It sank into the swamp."
Sure.
Fell down and sank into the swamp.
All right, how much we got left? We
Yeah,
we could take a break.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Let's take a break.
All right. We'll be right back.
Be right back. Me?
Is it you?
I don't know. Yeah.
Hey, we're back.
Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Can't remember whose job it is to introduce the show. But all right, we're going to shut up for a while and let's get through the rest of these. We pushed you all the way through 3 segments,
Yeah.
arguing every point. So yeah, anyways, this is great.
Take it away, Tony.
Great presentation, buddy.
That's right.
Okay, so back to Northwest Africa. Morocco is a location that it's featured in that Atlas of Cursed Places show that I mentioned earlier that talked about Richat. And this was developed by, or this theory was developed by a guy named Michael Hubner, who has actually passed away since. But he used a statistical method known as hierarchical constraint satisfaction, which sounds way more complicated than it really is. I mean, what it essentially is defining a series of parameters and then deciding, does this place meet that parameter or not? And then counting up the number of parameters it meets and then figuring out a percentage for that, and then comparing it with all the other places and saying which place met all the parameters more than all the other places. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So essentially what he did was he tried to go through Plato's text and, define a parameter for each sort of like detail Plato gives, and then just throw all that stuff on a map and then, say which location matches his parameters most. What he came back with was Morocco. But obviously with something like this, how you define those parameters is going to lead you to what site you identify. So, like if you guys are interested, I can kind of go through some of that, but essentially, some of the parameters, I should say for most of the parameters, there's arguments that could be made that the parameter is defined wrong or just is wrong itself, or, maybe could be worded different. I don't know. There's, for basically every parameter he used, and I can kind of go through some of them, there's questions that could be raised. So one of the parameters was the distance to Athens had to be less than 5,000 kilometers. So his reasoning was that if you're launching a giant naval invasion of another place, you should be within somewhat close proximity. He came to 5,000 kilometers because when Alexander went on his conquering spree, that was how far he ended up from Greece when it was all said and done. So he figured that was like the longest distance you could think somebody could go on a conquering spree. So he came up with that. Other people, some people are say that, 5,000 kilometers is a long ways to go with 1,200 ships. So, maybe you'd have to be closer. Other people say that that's not far enough. So some of it, like he has some of his other constraints are, obvious, like Atlantis should be located close to a sea or an ocean. Sure. But then he also repeats some of them. So Atlantis should be located close to a sea or an ocean, which is large in relation to the Mediterranean, connected to the Mediterranean by a strait. So you've repeated part of that, and then you've essentially just said one ocean.
Yeah.
That's the Atlantic Ocean. So why not just say it's on the Atlantic Ocean? I don't know. So anyways, I don't want to go through this whole thing, but essentially most of these parameters he's defined to come up with Morocco, there's all of them, most of them could be debated. on the other hand, he found some compelling stuff in Morocco, right? There's the 3 different colored rocks. There's the red rock, the black rock, the white rock. He found rock cut docks on the shore. He's got this area here where he's highlighted sort of what he calls the island of Atlantis, but it's surrounded entirely by mountains, the high Atlas mountains at the top, the anti-Atlas on the sides and the bottom. So there's, elements of it that match Plato's description.
Yeah.
And then there's also, he has the help of Diodorus Siculus, who's a 1st century BC Greek historian. And he relates how the Amazons fought against a people called the Atlanteans. So I'll just read this part. The Amazons embarked upon great ventures, a longing having come over them to invade many parts of the inhabited world. The first people against whom they advanced, according to the tale, was the Atlanteans, the most civilized men among the inhabitants of those regions, who dwelt in a prosperous country and possessed great cities. It is among them, we are told, that mythology places the birth of the gods, in the regions which lie along the shore of the ocean, in this respect agreeing with those among the Greeks who relate legends, and about this we shall speak in detail a little later. But the Amazons, typically in Greek mythology, are not located on the west coast of Africa. They're usually located like north of the Black Sea or in like the northern steppe area. So it's hard to know what's going on here. If the Amazons being in Africa is part of this sort of like westward migration of Greek mythology as Greeks started exploring more to the west. But it's weird because this is where we get into the problems with Greek mythology and with like the Greek colonization period that's going on in the classical era, because the Greeks essentially sent colonies all over the place trying to colonize areas because they didn't have enough food in Greece, because Greece doesn't really have that rich soil. So, whether the, I don't know, the archaeological evidence for the Amazon, to the degree that archaeologists think there were Amazons, that all comes again from the northern steppes area, north of the Black Sea.
Yeah.
So why the Amazons are in the west coast of Africa, I don't know. It's hard to know what's going on with this, but that's one of the, Diodorus Siculus is one of the Greek people that Michael Huebner, who developed this theory, will point to and say, well, here's a person talking about Atlantis being in West Africa.
Are there circles?
What's up?
Are there circles?
There actually is. I don't have that picture on here because it's not like, they're not super well defined, and they're like literally in the foothills of the mountains.
Okay.
The circles are, so like there's not enough plain space around it between it and the mountain. I don't know, but there is like an area with circles that he thinks is the central city.
Okay. All right.
So there are circles for Morocco.
Okay. I was going to say no circles. Didn't happen.
No circles, no dice.
Yeah.
Another one is Malta. And as soon as I say that the guy who developed this thinks the cart ruts are the canals, Russ is going to laugh. Because but yeah, so Malta's another one that gets brought up. Malta had a megalithic culture that seemingly ended catastrophically.
Yep.
There's evidence in the hypogeum of, just like a consistent matrix of soil all throughout the whole thing, as if it was just inundated with water and mud and stuff in like a giant tsunami or some sort of, water catastrophe.
That's right.
So there was definitely catastrophe in Malta at some point in time. There was definitely a high civil, not high, there was definitely a culture that was building megaliths and was civilized to a certain degree. But yeah, so, one of the things that the main person, Anton Misfood, is the main guy who promotes the Malta theory, talks about is that the cart ruts were the canals. The cart ruts is a description that's used for them because they look like cart ruts. They don't look like canals.
Yeah.
They look like they were created by, driving something through mud or whatever. They don't look like they were used to channel water. They go up and down hills. Like you're not going to channel water up a hill.
Yeah. Mifsud is the guy that Graham talks to a lot in Underworld, right? He's from Malta.
It's a different Mifsud.
Okay.
Mifsud's a popular last name on Malta, apparently.
Okay. All right.
Yep. No, because I thought the same thing at first. I was like, wait, what? Who's this Mifsud guy?
Yeah.
No, there's apparently Mifsud is a very, very, very popular name on Malta. There's like 12 families on Malta or something. I don't know, not literally, but like, yeah, it's
Okay,
a small
yeah.
place.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the Graham talks to him, as food guy. That's the diver that's taking him to the different places and showing him. Yeah, because some of the cart routes go underwater.
Yeah.
Like, you know, into the sea.
It's also the guy that tells him about all the problems that the local archaeology and museum have there with stuff in the hypogeum, like that they erased the bison bull off the wall.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and the Mifsud, Anton Mifsud, the guy who promotes the Malta Atlantis thing, has his own stories about that type of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, he lives on Malta, so he's also very familiar with all that stuff. And yeah, he's had similar unpleasant experiences, I think, with the Maltese authorities.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Malta. Another one in the Mediterranean would be Sardinia, or just the central Mediterranean region in general.
Wow.
Sardinia gets brought up because of the Nuragis.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
Look
those
at
are
that.
those are amazing.
Well, so the thing on the left is, I don't think people are really sure what that was. There's
Is that a
couple ideas,
stairway
but it's
going
actually
down?
like goes underground to like a cistern.
Yeah.
And then the thing on the right, it's what's called a nuragi. It's these like circular palace structures that were built all over. There's thousands of them all over Malta.
Wow.
Wow.
There's
awesome.
some that are in better condition of
Sardinia.
that are still in better condition in Sardinia. I said Malta. Yeah, there's thousands of nuragis all over Sardinia. Some in better condition than that one. I think that one's just like the most extensive, as far as you can see. The ruins kind of extend out pretty far.
Yeah.
Most of them are more just kind of like the central structure.
That thing on the left there kind of looks like what are they called? The key
structures in Japan.
in Japan. Yeah, the key tombs or something. I can't remember what they're called, but yeah, they have this.
Yeah,
keyhole
that's
shape.
an interesting structure. It's got like ashlar masonry,
Yeah.
which is not typically what the Nuragis were done with, but similar to like Minoan and like Mycenaean Tholos tombs are built with some similar architecture. So it's hard to know what was going on with that particular
I'm pretty
structure.
sure I've seen that staircase in Legend of Zelda. It looks just like
Probably.
it.
Yeah, that looks like a Legend of Zelda staircase.
Yeah.
One of the problems with Sardinia is, maybe you can see this on the map, is there really isn't an extensive plain. It's pretty mountainous, the whole island.
Yeah.
Most of the islands in the Mediterranean are pretty mountainous because they're islands in the Mediterranean. They're promontories typically. But yeah, it was also like a big source of copper during the Bronze Age. So, there's, metal workings on it and stuff like that. But yeah, mainly the thing with Sardinia is and also Sardinia would have been, if we're getting to the Sea People stuff, then that's thought to be the source of the Sherdon, who were one of the prime movers of the Sea Peoples groups.
Yeah.
So if we're tying that into the Egyptian story of the Sea Peoples, it's, possible Sardinia was, the leading group among those people.
The problem with all these places, though, is they're kind of on land, right? I mean, isn't that the issue
Well, yeah,
here?
Sardinia is, maybe it would have been a little bit bigger at some point, but it's not underwater. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's very much above water right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Northern Europe is another one. And specifically Higalo land, where this arrow is pointing on this map, is thought to be possibly the central, city of Atlantis. This is super small now, but even you'll see this map here on the left, even 800 AD was a significantly larger chunk of land than it is now. So, it's just been shrinking steadily over time. But Northern Europe was tied in to the trading networks of the Bronze Age, and the Northern Europe thing gets into an interesting aspect of an interesting theory for orichalcum or orichalcium, which is that it was amber.
Amber, yeah.
Which is something that is mined, which is something that flashes red, which is something that people have coated things with. Like in Russia, there's the amber room where they coated all the walls and ceilings and floor with amber.
Yep.
So
That's
that
a really cool idea. Yeah.
that's kind of the idea of orichalcum being amber is, I don't know. I think that's interesting. Amber was certainly prized in the Bronze Age. Egyptians are known to use it. All the Bronze Age cultures prized it and used it a lot. So yeah, I mean the you know the problem with Northern Europe, I guess, would just be that the cultures at the time, I think everything they built was mainly wood. All the structures were mainly wood, not a lot of stone structures really. Which, you know, the Atlantis stuff doesn't talk about that many stone structures, but, you know, stone walls, temples, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I mean, this is you know, and also again, like this whole area here by Helgoland, that you're getting into an area where you're separating a sea from another sea.
Yeah.
You know, like different size seas or whatever. So that plays into that.
Where are the circles?
Yeah, there are no circles as far as I know.
Not buying it.
Troy. You guys are familiar with Troy, the city of Troy? That's people have proposed as Atlantis.
Huh.
This illustration on the left is a theoretical reconstruction of what Troy could have possibly looked like. This is, you know, based on it's based on like the amount of archaeology that's been done in the plain of Troy is very, very, very minimal.
Yeah.
Almost all of it's been done on the citadel. So they know almost certainly there was a lower town. They found some evidence of it when doing like drill cores in the lower plain there. They've come up with pottery sherds and stuff like that. So they know there was a lower town, and it was pretty deep. Like it's essentially like a giant alluvial plain where there is now with all these rivers and stuff. So this whole area where this lower town of Troy would have been is essentially buried under mud now. It's not mud, but, you know, under soil.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's no way where it would have been complete concentric circles, but there was also definitely a lot of canal work done in the plain of Troy. And it's also thought that in the Bronze Age, like right now, there's not this, like, if you look in this illustration, there's this like harbor that comes in on the left side.
Yeah.
That's not there at all now, but it's thought during the Bronze Age and before there was like a harbor from the sea that came in.
That's a beautiful illustration. That's really, it's a really interesting idea.
Yeah. Well, and so one thing too, Homer talks about with Troy is they had the hot and cold springs.
Yeah.
Obviously there was a giant war with the Greeks.
Yep.
That's, you know, a fairly famous story about the Trojan War. It's in front of Pillars of Hercules. The Dardanelles or the you know, the Strait in the Black Sea has at some points been called the Pillars of Hercules by different authors. And then that's where you can get into this whole, you know, where you're passing to the other sea and this sea is a harbor or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea. Also, you're dealing too with this idea now of the Luwians and Western Anatolia, where like a lot of maps of the Bronze Age, you'll see basically all of Turkey is shown as Hittite country or the Hittite Empire. But that was really only the case during like about 100 years. During most of the Bronze Age, Western Anatolia was, you know, nominally ruled by the Hittites, but usually not ruled by the Hittites. This yellow circle that's on this map is larger than is probably warranted, but the Luwians themselves as a people group make up most of Anatolia. And towards the end of the Hittite Empire, a lot of Luwian kind of words had started to creep into Hittite, and the Hittites themselves in their archives, a lot of documents were in the Luwian language. So there certainly were a lot of Luwian speakers in Anatolia. And so then the question is, was Luwia its own entity, political entity? It could have been this sort of like, you know, a bunch of different kingdoms that weren't really necessarily one unit, but they would maybe come together when necessary. So I don't know. That's the main idea with Troy, though, is that it's essentially, you know, the Trojan War was the War of Atlantis, and the Egyptians are retelling the Trojan War to Greek.
But would Solon have completely forgotten about the Trojan War by that time? I mean,
no, he would have known about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you know, some people, or not some people, the Eberhard Zanger, the main guy who is the proponent of the Troy theory, he says that maybe Plato realized that's what was going on, and that's why he stopped writing the story of Atlantis.
Oh, Plato was like
writing it, and he was like, "Oh wait, I'm telling the story of the Battle of Troy." Or whatever, so.
Interesting.
So another one is Bolivia. And this is actually interesting for what you guys have been talking about with Ben recently. This is developed by a guy named Jim Allen. Essentially, the Altiplano is what he's talking about as Atlantis. So this up here is Lake Titicaca.
Yep.
And then there's this is Lake Napu, I think is what it's called. But essentially the idea is at one point this whole area was flooded, but it was like, this would be the plain. And then you have Atlantis here.
I do see a
been
sort of a circular structure down there in the southern part of the yellow highlighted area that was the plain.
Well, that would have been too big, but there is this structure right here, which is not a full circle, but he thinks it's got circular elements to it, and then this whole other half seems to have been like eroded. I don't know. There's this element here, which is kind of circular, and it's over right here. Proportionally, would have been about the size of Atlantis compared to this plane.
The problem with this one is that it's the opposite of being under the ocean. It's at like 13,000 feet above sea level.
Yeah, I mean, this is super high.
It does say that the mountains rose.
He's finding the grid pattern on the Altiplano. I'm sorry, what was that, Kyle?
Well, I was just saying that it does say that the mountains rose, just like
precipitously on all sides
out of the sea.
So that would be this, surrounded on all sides by mountains. And here he doesn't find just rocks, but he finds it in like actual cut building stones.
Yeah.
In red, white, and black material.
Beautiful.
There's the crosshatch canals, which appear to still be there.
Very cool.
Wow.
This is an interesting one. I mean, the problem is, how would you get a navy from Bolivia to Athens?
Locks. Lots of locks.
Yeah. So would you go through the Amazon, or would you go all the way around South America? And then if you're doing that, like,
well, you're using crystal spaceships.
Are you going? I don't remember if you're going with or with, but like that Southern Cape is super dangerous for ships.
Yeah. You need crystal spaceships.
I don't know. Are you sailing around South America? I mean, that just seems like quite the voyage.
Yeah, it's a long way.
To get from Bolivia. I mean, that's, if you're running a trading mission, that's one thing. If you're doing a 1,200 ship invasion, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
So North America is another one, and that's mainly just people will say, hey, the copper had to go somewhere.
Yep.
Also, Poverty Point has circles.
Yep, there's a lot of giant circles in the American mound structures and all that.
Yep.
Yeah. But then most of the mounds are dated to much, much, much later than
Of course.
Yeah.
Than would have been Atlantis. So
yep. And not necessarily buying all that dating, but
the copper was mined during the European Bronze Age. So
yeah. Some of it.
Yeah, some of it, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is an idea. People just see the circles on Poverty Point and they're like, hey, Atlantis.
Of course.
So other theories, one would be the Black Sea theory. So the Black Sea, I don't know if you see, essentially everywhere on this top picture, well, there's like a blue dotted line, which you might be able to see, but basically everywhere where it looks like coastal plain, that was all a below water at one point in time. I mean, above water at one point in time. And then about, 5,500 BC, the Bosphorus broke and the Black Sea flooded. Now that would have not been, we were talking about this a little bit in the break. Plato says that the catastrophe was a single day and a single night. The Black Sea flood would have not been a single day and single night. This would have definitely been an event that took, a month, if not more, to fully fill this area. I mean, you have water coming through just the Bosphorus, so it would have been coming through pretty quickly, but it would have still taken time to fill. But this also ties into with like the Indo-European dispersal, which seems to tie in with the flooding of the Black Sea. And you see, like right after the flooding of the Black Sea, culture like the Kurgan culture starts to show up in the steppe area north of the Black Sea. And then the Kurgan culture seems to be the source of, basically all the Indo-European cultures that follow. So all through Europe and then down into India and Anatolia. So even if this isn't necessarily the impetus of the Atlantis theory, it still played a big role in everything that happened afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's still like a pretty catastrophic event.
Yeah, it was catastrophic. Yeah. It was a very interesting story too.
There's just some stuff they found under the water, like dwellings.
Yeah.
Another theory is Sicily. And this is really more just like, this gets into Plato made it up and he was using one of the modern analogs for it. So Sicily during Plato's time was a Greek colony. But it had like this holy island, Ortegia, which you see down here. It's this area down here.
Yeah.
And it was essentially a holy island. So it was just temples and like the palace was there, would have been surrounded by a wall. And then there was the actual plain of Syracuse, which also was surrounded by its own, not the entire plain, just like the city part. It would have been a small, actually, I think it's just this area here, or no, it was a larger area. It's not shown on here. There was a wall that surrounded the actual plain area. It wasn't this entire plain, but it was a fairly decent sized wall that surrounded the actual plain area as well. Sicily, actually, the Greeks tried to invade Sicily at one point in time. So the Sicilians fought a war against the Athenians. It doesn't fit in a lot of respects in that the Sicilians beat the Athenians. There was no natural catastrophe that destroyed Sicily or Syracuse. So, I don't know. It's just one of those things where people who want to say that Plato made it all up, this is something they point to and say, well, this fits some of the things. And Plato spent time in Syracuse, so he was definitely very familiar with the place.
Yeah.
So, he would have been, it maybe would have inspired him possibly. I don't know, as far as like the descriptions of the center city, maybe. But it seems unlikely that was the impetus of the whole story.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting is this place called Hiliki, which was destroyed by a tsunami in 373 BC, which would have been during Plato's lifetime. They had a temple to Poseidon and a bronze statue of Poseidon in the middle of the city. So it was a city like, Poseidon was their chief god and was destroyed by a tsunami. It was just, one city in Greece. It wasn't like its own civilization or anything like that.
Yeah.
It didn't go to war with, Athens or anybody like that. It's just, people will point this out and say, well, during Plato's lifetime, there was this place, Hiliki, that was destroyed by a tsunami. So this could have possibly inspired Plato. Hiliki actually, though, is potentially a pretty interesting archaeological site because it would have been buried intact, maybe.
Yeah.
So you could have possibly have a classical Greek city that they could still discover intact.
As intact
Last
as it
thing
would
we
be.
want to get to is fun with numbers, though.
Okay.
So this all just concerns the inner city and the rings and the numbers that are associated with the inner city and the rings. So just, if you guys remember the very first sentence of Timaeus, and we talked about this in the very first podcast I was on, but it begins 1, 2, 3, where is the fourth?
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. And if you look at the numbers involved with the circles on the city, we're dealing with the same sort of thing. We're dealing with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 5. There's no fourth. Where's the fourth? Where's the number 4? I don't know what the significance of that is. It plays into that opening sentence. We're also dealing with the ratio of rings of water to rings of land in width being 6 to 5. So the 3 plus 2 plus 1 of water rings is 6 plus the 3 plus 2 of land rings is 5. So we're dealing with this 6-5 thing again. And then that also gets into, in Timaeus, Plato talks about this thing he calls the world soul. And it's almost incomprehensible in a way to know what he's really talking about. And I'll read this passage. I don't necessarily know I don't expect you guys to understand it. I don't necessarily know if I understand it. but we'll talk about what he possibly might be meaning and then how some of these numbers play into that. So out of the indivisible and unchangeable, and also out of which is divisible and has to do with material bodies, he compounded a third and intermediate kind of essence, partaking of the nature of the same and of the other, and this compound he placed accordingly in a mean between the indivisible and the divisible and material. He took three elements of the same, the other and the essence, and mingled them into one form, compressing by force the reluctant and unsocial nature of the other into the same. So right away, I mean, just to break off for a second, we're dealing a little bit with like some of this like number stuff with like 1 becomes 2 in a division, 2 becomes 3 as a relationship, this kind of stuff that like with this like number numerology or whatever, this Pythagorean numerology. When he had mingled them with the essence and out of 3 made 1, he again divided this whole into as many portions as was fitting, each portion being a compound of the same, the other and the essence. And he proceeded to divide after this manner. First of all, he took away one part of the whole, and then he separated a second part, which was double the first, and then he took away a third part, which was half as much again as the second and 3 times as much as the first. And then he took a fourth part, which was twice as much as the second, and a fifth part, which was 3 times the third, and a sixth part, which was 8 times the first, and a seventh part, which was 27 times the first. So in the end, the numbers we end up with are 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 8, and 27. And he says them in that order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 8, 27. So he says them out of order, 9, then 8, then 27. And if you draw the numbers out in a triangle, you can see, as I've done up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 8, 27. 4 is a square of 2, and 8 is a cube of 2. 9 is a square of 3. 27 is a cube of 3. That's at least in some of the breakdowns of what this potentially means by people who understand Platonic math better than I do. This is what they think he's doing here. So if we correlate this with the rings of water and land, and we color the rings of water blue and the rings of land 3, we can
green.
go rings of water 1, 2, 3, and then we add a ring of land to square the ring of water 2. We add a ring of land to cube the ring of water. So we're dealing with the same numbers, as he's got with the rings of land and water that he's dealing with this world soul thing. Additionally, the total diameter of the center city, 3 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1 plus 5 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3 plus 3 is 27. So it definitely seems to me, given the fact that Atlantis is in the Timaeus, and the Timaeus has all this weird numerology stuff, and this isn't the only number stuff he does in the Timaeus. This is just sort of like one of the examples of it. It almost seems to me like these numbers that he's dealing with the widths of the canals don't actually represent any kind of real sizes. They're just, he's doing something with the numbers here. He's trying to communicate something about Atlantis possibly, or he's just trying to communicate something and he's using these numbers to do it.
Yeah, some secret way of communicating stuff.
I find in support of that is if you read a lot of or if you read Egyptian literature or any kind of like Egyptian stuff, they never keep track of dimensions the way the story of Atlantis keeps track of dimensions. Like they go on expeditions to Punt and they never describe Punt in terms of numbers. They describe it in terms of the goods they can get from it. And I haven't really read any Egyptian stories where they talk about numbers the way that the story of Atlantis talks about numbers, which just makes me think a lot of these numbers are Plato doing number things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Good point.
It sounds like a word problem, right? That last part. First of all, he took away one part of the whole, and then he separated a second part, which was double the first, and then he took away a third part, which is half as much again as the second and 3 times as much as the first. It's like, I started thinking of a word problem in math.
Yeah.
You have to like draw it out to know what he's doing.
Yeah. You completely lose track after the.
No, and that's what I think. In some of these things, that's what I think he's doing. He's almost inviting you to draw it out,
Yeah.
to figure it out and say, okay, this is what he's talking about. This is,
It makes me think that he's trying. He's actually, like you're saying, he's trying to communicate some, secret alchemical thing, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? It's some kind of secret.
Yeah, I definitely get the feeling he's trying to communicate knowledge that he doesn't want to just say. He wants people to
outright.
figure
Yeah,
it out.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's
and you're only
cool.
gonna be able to figure it out if you have contextual clues that we probably are missing at this point in time.
Yeah.
There's an Easter egg in there.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. There's yes.
That's cool.
And this is the thing, like this stuff all comes from Timaeus, the non-Atlantis parts. So, there's a whole, that Timaeus dialogue is pretty dense and it's got a lot of different number stuff in it. So, it's like, is he trying to represent some of those concepts that he's talking about in Timaeus with some of these things he's doing in the story of Atlantis? And that's why he's embedding the story of Atlantis in Timaeus the way he is, and then how much of that is related to cosmology and, it just gets into a lot of stuff. And, going back to the hypotheses that we just all went through, almost none of them have rings. And the thing is, the rings, it's the rings themselves, Plato says, were made by Poseidon. He talks about the canals being made by the people, each generation successively after adding more to the canals, but the rings he talks about were laid out by Poseidon. So that almost seems like it could be, a natural phenomenon or something, or like a comet impact or something created this thing, if it ever existed in the first place, or if Plato's not just, maybe Poseidon created it and that's why it's holy, and that's why it is represented with these numbers the way it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's all I got, though.
Oh, that's great.
Awesome.
That was good stuff.
Heck yeah, man.
Yeah. Just in time.
Sweet.
Yeah.
4 segments. Boom.
4 segments. Yep. So we'll go ahead and do the inning step.
Give it a wrap.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up.
Well, thanks so much, Tony. We really appreciate you coming on. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
That was all very interesting stuff. It actually makes me want to go look into a lot of these other sites that you brought up, just because regardless of the Atlantis connection, they're just very curious. So, yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me again.
Yep, no problem. And anytime you want to come back, just let us know.
This might be all the Atlantis material I have.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, but everybody can get a hold of us, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. Check out the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. You can find all the stuff related to the podcast there, including the archive of old episodes. Join the Discord if you want to hang out with all the Snake Force. Be nice in the Discord. And that whole place is run by Jeff and the many mods that are in there, including Tony, who's one of the mods. I'm not sure how much credit I should give him for running the place, but yeah, he is actually one of the mods. No, don't, Tony.
I mostly just pop in and skirt people.
That's right. Thanks to History Shift.
This is what Zahi says.
That's right, yeah. And thanks to History Shift, who makes all the YouTube videos, including this one. Thanks to you, buddy. You do a lot of work. We really appreciate that. And thanks to all you listeners out there. We love you.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Oh, back to work.
We both like.
Yeah, I missed that you were pointing at me. I was like, why aren't they saying anything? And then I looked.